I thought it was a romance. Turns out it's a manual on how to raise a maniac. Now my brain won't stop screaming, "Help! This psycho is way too good at love."
Trapped in the Phantom of the Opera. The extras. In the middle of the night, Polly felt a sudden chill on her face. Something was lightly gliding across her cheek. Still groggy with sleep, she forced her eyes open and was met with a sight that made her brain short-circuit. A white mask, emotionless and cold as wax, stared down at her. Erik was half kneeling beside her, unmoving, staring straight into her face. In his hand, he held a knife. The cold blade was lightly sliding across her cheek, up and down, tracing an invisible path. Without even opening her eyes fully, Polly reached out, grabbed his wrist, and kissed his fingers. "Stop messing around. I'm exhausted." But Erik suddenly gripped her wrist in return, hard. So hard it felt like he might snap her bones. Polly gasped and kicked him hard. "Enough already. Let go." Erik paused for a few seconds, then slowly loosened his grip. Polly fumbled under her pillow, pulled out her phone, and squinted at the screen. It was 4 a.m. She turned to look at Erik again. He was still holding the knife. She frowned and scolded him. "Why are you still holding that? Put it down and go to sleep." He stared at her for a long time before finally setting the knife aside. Polly patted the space next to her. "Lie down." Several seconds passed before he obeyed, lying down at a great distance, his body rigid as a board. Polly had no idea what was up with him. She shifted closer, wrapped her arm around his waist, and closed her eyes, ready to go back to sleep. His body tensed even more. His breathing turned quick and uneven, like he was holding something back. Polly was curious but didn't dwell on it. Ever since they returned to the modern world, his mood had been erratic, nothing she wasn't used to by now. After they had toured much of the Western Hemisphere, Polly received a letter from Tesla. In it, Tesla mentioned he might have found a passage between the two timelines. Unfortunately, the lab caught fire before he could examine it closely. Historically, Tesla's rumored time travel incident happened in 1895, but Polly received his letter in 1894, which meant not only had the Niagara hydroelectric plant been completed early, even Tesla's experiments had moved up. Just as Polly was about to tell Erik about it, he snatched the letter from her hands and coldly said, "Don't even think about it," before locking her in the bedroom. To be fair, it wasn't a bad time. She didn't have to lift a finger. Her body and soul were both well taken care of. But Erik had been genuinely angry. His expression dark, jaw clenched, veins bulging along his neck, arms, and torso. Everything he did was rougher than usual. Polly almost felt bad. Almost. Because watching him like that, she didn't feel the least bit guilty. Only turned on. A few days later, once he had calmed down a little, he leaned in close and whispered, "Do you still want to go back?" Before this, Erik had always been patient with her, like a wild hunter. He would observe, track, wait for the right moment, then strike. He was rarely impulsive. The most extreme thing he'd ever done was spend an entire night watching her sleep. But those past few days, he clung to her like wet paper, suffocating her. Polly was starting to forget what it felt like to walk on her own. It was insane. Sighing, she said, "How many times do I have to say it? I said I want to go back together, not by myself." Erik looked down at her with chilling eyes. "What if I can't go back with you?" "Then I'm not going." She coaxed him. "I was just bringing up the possibility. I never said I was definitely going. Don't be mad, okay?" He closed his eyes and took a few shaky breaths. The veins on his forehead pulsed, clearly still fuming. Polly reached out and gently patted his back. After a while, his breathing evened out. He buried his face in the crook of her neck and said in a low voice, "It's not that I don't want you to go back. I just don't want to lose you." "I know," she whispered. "I don't want to lose you either." And just like that, the issue was shelved. Polly stopped bringing up the idea of returning to the modern world and instead focused on building a life in the 19th century. The rest of the circus troupe had moved on, except Flora, who stayed in Paris to continue ballet training. The others took Erik's mobile haunted house and resumed touring around the world. Wherever they went, they sent letters to keep Polly updated. In December of 1894, Marbelle gave birth to a daughter and named her Polly. Her husband, a banker, had fainted the first time he saw the haunted house performance. After that, he followed their caravan everywhere, determined to beat the game, only to fall in love with Marbelle instead. Emily never remarried and partnered with Rivers to manage the troupe. He handled finances and legal affairs, she ran rehearsals and handled daily logistics. Polly was technically still the troupe's manager, but in truth, Emily was the one keeping everything running. Theodore and Thorne hadn't changed much. According to Marbell, they had each made backup plans to escape when Erik inevitably lost his mind. But just when things were falling apart, Polly returned. Her return was like a shot of adrenaline. The broken group stitched itself back together. Truthfully, her presence didn't change much on paper. Thorne already knew how to set up the haunted house's traps. Everyone's acting skills had improved under Erik's guidance. Rivers, being a lawyer, could keep their finances clean and even help them attract new investors. The scripts and management tricks had all been passed on before Polly died. But the difference in atmosphere was night and day. It was like a string had suddenly threaded all the loose beads together. Polly laughed and cried reading their letters. She suspected they'd only wanted to leave because they were scared of Erik. Judging by the journal entries after she died, the troupe had lived in constant fear, so it made sense they wanted to run. Luckily, she returned in time to reunite them. In March 1895, Erik suddenly relented and agreed to return to the modern world with her. Around the same time, he finally let go of his paranoia about smartphones and started learning how to use one. Polly suspected he had come across passages about World War I and II in her ebook library. For someone like him, war wasn't frightening. It was an opportunity to make a fortune. And yet, because he didn't want her to live through blood-soaked chaos, he chose to give it all up and follow her into a completely foreign era. That decision shook her to the core. Before returning, Erik made thorough preparations. He set up a trust fund at a Swiss bank, with Polly listed as the beneficiary, Polly of 2026. To ensure the money would reach her in the future, the contract detailed all her physical features, even her social security number. The lawyer thought they were insane, transferring a fortune to a stranger from over a century in the future, but the bank had a department dedicated to managing long-term trusts. Polly did a quick calculation of the accumulated interest and realized she had just become a billionaire. In addition to cash, they also had real estate, which they handed over to Rivers for management. They had bought several gorgeous properties while traveling the Western Hemisphere. Rivers could either rent them out or turn them into haunted houses with Emily. All the profits would go to the troupe. Polly trusted Rivers completely because Erik once told her that he was the trustee of the New Orleans house. Even though it had never been rented out, Rivers and his family had maintained it all the way into the present. No one was more trustworthy. The process of returning to the modern world was shockingly simple. So simple Polly had trouble believing it. They just stood in a man-made magnetic field, closed their eyes, and when they opened them again, they were back. Sadly, there was no Tesla in the modern world, only Musk. Otherwise, she might have been able to travel back and forth at will. Thanks to Tesla's repeated assurances, Erik had crossed over with her. But whether it was a side effect of time travel or something else, his mood had been wildly unstable since returning. If he couldn't see Polly for even a few minutes, he became agitated. Just moments ago, he had even pressed a knife to her cheek. Good thing she kicked him. It brought him back to reality. Polly, still half asleep, wondered, was it just her imagination? His eyes just now had been so cold, so hollow, like a lifeless wax figure. If she remembered correctly, only back when they first met had his eyes looked like that, blank and empty. Also, why the mask in the middle of the night? Was this some new attempt at seduction? Polly couldn't figure it out. After a long moment, she decided to sleep on it. She'd deal with it tomorrow. Erik opened his eyes and realized he was in an unfamiliar bedroom. Next to him lay an unfamiliar woman. He wasn't wearing a mask or gloves. His pajamas were loose, barely covering anything. This wasn't how he dressed. Where was he? Luckily, his mask was on the nightstand. Beside it, a knife. Erik quickly put on the mask, grabbed the knife, and turned to interrogate the strange woman beside him. But to his surprise, she didn't react defensively at all. When he touched her cheek with the knife, she kissed his fingers. The sensation was electric. His fingers tingled, his heart pounded, every pore on his body quivered, and all the blood in his body surged downward. What was happening? He'd never felt anything like this, not even when his hands had been set on fire. Where was he? Just 10 minutes ago, he'd been dragged behind a horse, bloodied and broken. And now he was here? But soon, Erik realized something was wrong. When he recalled the scene of being dragged by a horse, he felt a hazy sense of nostalgia, as if it had happened years ago, not just before he passed out. His body felt different too. Whenever he saw the woman beside him, his heart would race, and he couldn't suppress the excitement welling up inside. It felt as if she was incredibly important to him. Just watching her sleep beside him filled him with such joy that it took his breath away. Why was this happening? Apart from that, his body had changed significantly. Erik was absolutely certain this was his own body. That familiar sense of filth and ugliness was unmistakable. But strangely, the calluses on his palms were gone. The muscles on his shoulders, back, and abdomen were more defined than before. Even his forearms had toned, sleek lines. A body couldn't change this much in such a short time. There was only one possibility. It had been several years since he was dragged by that horse. That also explained why the memory felt like a distant recollection. Then, the woman told him to put down the knife and go to sleep. In the dim light, he narrowed his eyes and got a good look at her face. Long, curly black hair, pale skin, delicate features. She looked a bit like a boy from the circus named Clement. It had been too long, and his memory was fuzzy. He vaguely remembered being dragged by the horse, because Clement had framed him. So who was this woman? Clement's sister? And why were they sharing a bed? What was that overwhelming excitement when he looked at her? So many questions were piling up in his mind. Before he realized it, he had already obeyed her command and put the knife down. The next second, she motioned for him to lie down. He stared at her coldly. If she dared show even a hint of mockery, no matter who she was, he would kill her. Strangely, even without memories of the past years, just the thought of hurting her caused an unbearable ache in his chest. He couldn't understand this feeling. Who was she, really? There was no way he'd gotten married. She couldn't be his wife. But aside from a wife, he couldn't imagine any other woman being this intimate with him. Once he lay down, he didn't even have time to gather his thoughts when something heavy pressed against his waist. The woman had reached out to hug him, resting her head on his shoulder like she was planning to sleep that way. He had never been this physically close to a woman. The warm, smooth sensation of her skin made his hair stand on end, and his entire body tensed. In the past, even if a woman hugged him, he wouldn't have felt anything special. With such a hideous appearance, it was only natural that no one could love him. He never developed feelings or reactions toward anyone. But somehow, maybe because this body had become more vile and disgusting over the years, the moment her warmth touched him, something unmistakably stirred. He had never loathed his body more. It was shameless and disgusting. What made him hate himself even more was that the moment she leaned in, his first instinct was to grab her hair, force her head up, and press a rough kiss to her lips, tangling his tongue with hers. It was the first time he'd had such explicit and filthy thoughts, and it nearly scared him. That night was doomed to be sleepless. Polly had one of the best sleeps in recent memory. Erik finally didn't wake her up in the middle of the night just to check if she was still there. She stretched lazily, stayed in bed scrolling through short videos, and waited for Erik to bring her breakfast. But after a long wait, he still hadn't shown up. Strange. Even now that they'd returned to the modern world, he still followed his old routine and would be up before 7 a.m. They were living in a scenic small town, about a 5 or 6 hour drive from the nearest big city. Still, they got fresh meat and vegetables delivered daily. After Erik finished his morning workout, he'd cook breakfast and bring it to her. But now, he was nowhere to be seen. Polly checked the time. It was already 10:30. Had something delayed him? She gave Erik a call. To her surprise, his phone rang on the nightstand. Her heart skipped a beat. Erik had gone out without his phone. That was very unusual. Ever since he discovered that phones let him reach her instantly, he would flood her with messages the moment she left his sight. At one point, Polly had seriously considered sending him to internet addiction rehab. Luckily, it was just a phase. Once he got used to using the phone, he stopped bombarding her with texts. But from then on, he always kept his phone close, sending her messages every so often to ask what she was doing. And now he had forgotten his phone? Polly immediately got up, washed quickly, changed clothes, grabbed the car keys, and headed out to find him. Thinking back to his behavior last night, she had a strong feeling something was wrong. It felt like something bad was going to happen. It wasn't tourist season. Most houses in town were vacant, windows shut, lawns covered in fallen leaves, the streets nearly empty, with barely a car passing by. The town was near snow-covered mountains and had great infrastructure, but aside from bars and restaurants, Most businesses only opened during peak seasons. Polly had no idea where Erik could have gone, alone, without a phone, without car keys. As time passed, her anxiety worsened. Cold sweat dampened her palms, making it hard to grip the steering wheel. Could he have gone back? A chill crept through her body. Her throat tightened as if she couldn't even swallow. It felt like a cold fog was stuck in her chest. After traveling to this era, Erik often showed signs of discomfort, sometimes forgetting where they were, sometimes thinking she was just a hallucination. He needed to hear her speak to believe she was real. Polly always thought it was due to his insecurity. She never imagined he'd vanish entirely. Now she finally understood why, after those 3 years of her disappearance, Erik had gone crazy. Why he stared at her every night, afraid she'd vanish again. The thought of him returning to the 19th century and leaving her alone here was driving her mad. The town was small. Within 2 hours, Polly had driven around the whole area. She even got out and asked the few open restaurants if anyone had seen a masked man. All the owners shook their heads. Polly's limbs felt weak. Her heart turned cold, and even her breath felt icy. Before leaving, Erik had transferred all his assets to the 2026 version of Polly, which meant if he went back, he'd be penniless. Even though she knew he was skilled at making money and would never let himself live in poverty, her nose still stung with emotion. She really didn't want to lose him. Polly shut her eyes tight, wiped away her tears, quickly composed herself, got back in the car, and headed home. It's fine, she told herself. Something similar had happened before. Worst case, she'd go back to the 19th century again. She was determined. Nothing could stop her from getting what she wanted. Back at the villa, she parked the car and was about to pack for New Orleans. Just then, a gloved hand suddenly grabbed her wrist. Polly turned around. Erik stood behind her, wearing his white mask, gripping her wrist tightly, and slammed her against the wall. He loomed over her, his eyes cold and empty, like he'd turned back into that heartless killing machine. Harsh, heavy breathing sounded above her. Inhale, exhale. It had been a long time since she'd heard him breathe like this, like a beast in hunting mode, slow, powerful, and intense. Unfortunately, she wasn't in the mood for role-playing today. She rarely got angry, but today she really was. She pushed him with a hand. Where were you this morning? Why didn't you take your phone? Usually if I just go to the bathroom, you panic. Don't you think I'd get just as worried? And what was up with last night? You freaked me out. Her eyes still burned with fury, but her voice cracked with emotion. You always say you're scared I'll disappear. Don't you know I'm scared of losing you too? I was so scared I almost threw up. Erik didn't budge. Her push didn't even make him flinch, and his expression remained blank. It was like she'd stunned him with her scolding. Polly sniffled and, seeing the mask on his face, got even more irritated. She stood on tiptoe to pull it off. He instantly grabbed her wrist, his breathing intensifying. Polly glared at him. This is the 3rd time. You left bruises on me last night. I haven't even scolded you for that yet. Do it again, and I swear I'll ignore you for real. After a long pause, he finally released her hand. Polly tore off his mask and tossed it aside. Erik seemed lost in thought. His expression was strange. The way he looked at her was even stranger. His Adam's apple bobbing, his breath growing more and more erratic. He was breathing so fast his jaw trembled, like he was trembling from some uncontrollable excitement. Polly wasn't sure if he was doing it on purpose, but he looked like a starving wild dog, desperate to get closer, yet wary of her at the same time. Most likely, he was doing it on purpose. Ever since he realized that showing his crazier side didn't scare her, in fact, it made her eyes light up, he stopped hiding his true self. Sometimes he'd even say dark and obscene things just to amuse her. And Polly really did fall for it. She sighed and reached out to hold his hand. Erik's fingers trembled slightly, as if he wanted to pull away, but failed. Polly took off his black glove, lowered her head, and kissed his knuckles. She wasn't sure if it was her imagination, but he seemed more sensitive than usual today. Just that small kiss made his breathing scarily heavy. When she looked up at him, she was surprised to see his face had turned bright red, his ears flushed as red as blood, veins bulging on his outer ear. And contrasting those red ears was his gaze. He stared at her intensely, with a look she had never seen before. Polly's heart softened. She stepped closer and hugged his neck. The skin on his neck was burning hot, like boiling water. She touched his Adam's apple. It was scalding too, Polly couldn't help but chuckle and ask, "What's wrong today? Why are you so shy?" Erik didn't say a word. Polly didn't mind. She kissed the disfigured side of his face and grumbled, "I looked for you all afternoon. I'm starving. Go make lunch. I want garlic butter shrimp." Garlic butter shrimp, made by washing fresh shrimp, peeling them, coating them in garlic sauce, marinating them thoroughly, then tossing them into a preheated oven for a few minutes. This way the shrimp comes out fragrant, tender, and slightly crisp, without losing the original flavor of seafood. Polly had recently preferred lighter meals and liked to toss roasted shrimp and vegetables together, drizzling them with vinaigrette. This way, she could enjoy the savory taste of meat without the greasiness. Erik knew her tastes even better than she did. The vinaigrette he made was flavorful but not heavy, unlike other sauces that left your throat sticky after a few bites. After pushing Erik into the kitchen, Polly went to take a shower. She'd broken into a cold sweat while searching for him earlier, and her skin felt clammy and sticky, absolutely unbearable. After her shower, she slipped into a thin nightdress and headed to the kitchen to find Erik. She assumed half an hour would be plenty of time for him to prepare lunch for two. Garlic butter shrimp wasn't complicated. It just needed to be peeled and roasted. To her surprise, when she walked into the kitchen, he was still standing in front of the sink, staring blankly at the lively, wriggling shrimp. That's when Polly finally sensed something was wrong. She approached him. He spun around abruptly and grabbed her wrist, like an instinctual response to an ambush. Erik had been like that before. That's why, in the beginning, Polly rarely approached him from behind. She always made sure to enter his line of sight first before moving closer. It was basic survival etiquette when facing a wild beast. Never turn your back on one and never approach it from behind. The issue was, ever since they'd gotten together, that uncontrollable wildness had mellowed. He'd gradually become a normal man with feelings, not a constantly triggered animal. So why had he suddenly reverted to that cold, guarded version of himself? Was it after effects from time traveling or something else entirely? Polly stepped closer, examining him carefully. Under her gaze, Erik's eye twitched slightly. He instinctively turned his head away, avoiding her eyes. That reaction was definitely unique to Erik. Polly let out a quiet sigh of relief. She was probably overthinking it. But if he hadn't been possessed or swapped out with someone else, why was he acting so strangely? Polly thought for a moment, then gently flipped his slightly curled fingers and intertwined her fingers with his. Erik still wouldn't look at her and didn't resist, but his fingers trembled uncontrollably. Usually, he only reacted this strongly when she deliberately teased him. What was up with him today? Some new way of getting her attention? Or had she accidentally said something to upset him? But before this, even when he was mad at her, he never forgot to take care of her. He certainly wouldn't refuse to cook. Polly sighed again. Maybe she'd taken his efforts for granted. If he didn't want to cook, she could do it. Garlic butter shrimp wasn't hard after all. She leaned down and kissed his knuckles. "It's fine if you don't want to cook. I'll do it. Just sit nearby and wait." Erik didn't move or respond. Polly didn't mind. She preheated the oven, walked to the sink, peeled and rinsed the shrimp, then coated them with garlic sauce. She placed the shrimp in the oven and set the timer for 7 minutes. Erik stood nearby, his eyes lowered, silently watching her, lost in thought. 7 minutes later, the shrimp were ready. Polly also roasted some potatoes and vegetables, placed them at the bottom of the bowls, topped them with the juicy shrimp, drizzled vinaigrette, and voila, 2 light meals were ready. Seeing Erik still standing there, Polly couldn't help but kick him. "What are you staring at? Time to eat." He paused for quite a while before finally picking up his bowl and sitting at the table, yet still didn't touch the utensils. Polly put down her fork, walked over, and hugged him from behind. His body stiffened instantly, and his breathing grew rapid. Polly gently lifted his chin. Their eyes met. His expression was bizarre. Face flushed red, Adam's apple bobbing, veins on his forehead faintly pulsing, like he was lost in some intense emotion and couldn't pull himself out. Polly blinked, leaned in, and kissed his cheek. "What's wrong with you today? You're acting super weird." Erik wasn't sure if he was dreaming. But even if he was, he had never dreamed anything so wildly unrealistic. Last night, he couldn't sleep no matter how hard he tried, so he got up to inspect his surroundings. This should have been his home. The wardrobe was filled with his clothes, all in his size. But he never wore light-colored clothing. It was too eye-catching, bad for staying hidden. Yet the wardrobe had lots of light tones: white, gray, beige, subtle, clean, even cheerful. He must have been in a good mood when buying them. The sheet music on the piano was also written in his handwriting, but he had no idea who it was for. The melodies were soft and romantic, almost nauseating. Erik gave it a glance and got goosebumps. He quickly shoved it back. What puzzled him most was, if this was his place, why were there so many mirrors? Mirrors in the wardrobe, mirrors on the vanity, in the bathroom, even the washroom. They were everywhere, infuriating. Erik had considered leaving, but the moment he thought about walking away from the woman in bed, a crushing pain seized his chest. He couldn't comprehend that pain at all. Eventually, he forced himself to endure it, climbed out the window, and checked the surrounding area. The villa seemed to be in an affluent neighborhood. There were no stables in the backyard, no carriages, no hoofbeats outside the fence. It was already 5 a.m. The sky was just beginning to lighten, but the streetlights on both sides of the road were still on. Erik looked closely. Those were clearly electric lamps, bright and extravagant. A shiny black vehicle sped past, no horses pulling it, moving like a miniature train but without steam. Where was he? As he walked farther, he noticed the roads were clean and smooth. No manure, no muddy water, just pristine asphalt. Was the entire town this wealthy? Judging by the sun, it was around 6 a.m., but the town was eerily silent, as if still asleep. That didn't make sense. Even if the rich slept in, servants should be up preparing breakfast. Erik spent several hours walking around the town. He gradually realized he hadn't just lost a few years of memory. The technology in this town far exceeded anything he'd ever imagined. Back in 1885, he'd heard someone invented a horseless carriage with 3 wheels, powered by an internal combustion engine. Many coachmen panicked, afraid they'd lose their jobs. But 3 years passed, and nothing came of it. Everyone settled down, convinced horse-drawn carriages were irreplaceable. But now, these fast, silent cars clearly were the real thing. More advanced, more refined than what he'd heard of. How many years had he lost? And who was the woman sleeping next to him? For now, he had only one option: go back and interrogate her. When Erik returned to the villa, he spotted her immediately. He closed his eyes, suppressing the strange heat in his chest, walked up to her, and shoved her against the wall. With a loud thud, she hit it hard. In that moment, guilt surged in his chest. Why had he used so much force? Her back must be hurting. Erik took a deep breath, holding back the urge to check on her. He was just about to grab her throat and start questioning her when she shoved him off and scolded him relentlessly. Then, she cried. Just because she hadn't found him for one afternoon. Was he really that important to her? Erik looked at her, chest tightening painfully, like he'd come down with something, his whole body feverish and sore. And that was just the beginning. Next, she took off his mask, kissed his fingers, and the disfigured half of his face. A buzzing filled Erik's mind. His heart raced, body trembling with an electric ache from head to toe. Thinking of his body's odd reactions, her concern, the music on the piano, the neatly arranged clothes in the closet, Erik turned to look at her, and one impossible but likely guess surfaced in his mind. She was his wife. Then, she leaned close to his ear and asked again, "Did I say something wrong? Is that why you're upset?" Erik lowered his eyes. Within a heartbeat, he had his answer ready. "No, I just had a bad dream." She asked, not the least suspicious. "What kind of dream?" He replied slowly, "I dreamed I was back at the circus, being dragged by a horse. I was all torn up and passed out." She kissed his cheek. And then, she didn't ask why he dreamed of the circus, or why he'd been dragged by a horse. Only a wife would know such deeply hidden, shameful memories. She really was his wife. Erik paused for a long time before adding, "Nothing. It just made it hard to tell what's real and what's not." She didn't doubt him. "No wonder you were acting so weird last night. You scared me. I almost thought you were possessed." "Possessed? You forgot?" She said casually. "I ended up in Clement's body, which is how I met you. After coming back to the modern day with me, your mental state's been off. I seriously thought some spirit took over you again." Erik thought about it and immediately understood. They met because her soul had entered Clement's body. No wonder she resembled him slightly. And judging by their surroundings, she clearly wasn't from his era. Hence her saying back to the modern day. So, had he lost his memory? Or had his consciousness jumped into his future self? Erik couldn't say for sure yet. After saying that, she returned to her seat and continued eating. Erik lowered his head and ate in silence for a while. Suddenly, he thought, If he wasn't just amnesiac, but had possessed his future self's body, would she still treat him this way? Technically, they just met. They had no relationship. He shouldn't care what she thought of him. But the moment he imagined her withdrawing her warmth, the pain surged again, twisting in his chest like invisible chains choking him. How had his past self endured such a terrifying feeling? Erik finally learned the woman's name, Polly. Her name was written all over his sheet music. Almost every composition began with the words "to Polly." It seemed to be some kind of logographic script. He couldn't tell the exact pronunciation, only infer the meaning from the shape and order of the symbols. He was fluent in over a dozen languages, but this one was completely unfamiliar. And yet, the moment he saw the characters for Polly, he instinctively knew it was her name. It was like a conditioned reflex, a physiological response. How many times must he have written her name in private for him to still recognize it even after losing his memory? Erik felt a subtle contempt for his former self. He had no idea what he and Polly had gone through, but whatever it was, he shouldn't have lost himself over someone else. To be with Polly, his past self had clearly abandoned his own identity, wearing inappropriate clothes, composing incomprehensible music. Erik read through the entire book of sheet music with a cold, detached expression. He must have put on a very obedient front in front of Polly back then. Otherwise, she wouldn't order him around so casually, or remain unfazed when she saw a knife in his hand in the middle of the night. But could a relationship built on lies really last? She was so timid. Just missing him for one afternoon had terrified her to that extent. If she found out he was a cold-blooded monster who'd killed countless people, wouldn't she flee from him in the middle of the night? Erik closed the sheet music and tossed it aside. He planned to leave once this body's strange attachment to Polly faded. There was no other way. As long as this body had feelings for her, he couldn't bring himself to leave. Just like now, even half an hour without seeing her made him restless. His breathing grew erratic, like he was suffering from some unspeakable addiction. Polly had noticed something was off with Erik. All afternoon, he hadn't spoken first, nor had he come close to her as he usually did. Before, even just a glance from her would bring him over to nuzzle her neck and breathe in her scent. Sometimes, even if she was just speaking normally, he'd suddenly grab her chin, lean in and kiss her, tongue entwined, stealing the breath from her lips. Now he was avoiding physical contact and barely looked her in the eye. It was strange. That night, after showering, Polly lay in bed reading. But even by midnight, Erik still hadn't come in. She got up to search the villa and finally found him in the music room. He had designed that room himself, with soundproof walls so thick that not even a concert inside would disturb anyone outside. So when Polly opened the door, she was startled by the stormy, chaotic piano playing inside. It was the first time she'd heard him play so aggressively, like he was trying to suppress a terrifying impulse and was using the music to release it. Curious, Polly walked in. Erik seemed to hear her footsteps but didn't turn around. He kept playing, and the music grew more and more frantic, some notes even bordering on shrill, like a body convulsing from fever. Polly didn't interrupt. She sat down quietly beside him. Strangely, the music softened after that. Though the melody stayed the same, the tone shifted from violent storm to gentle drizzle, and the madness that had been building in each note vanished. When the piece ended, Erik turned slightly to look at her, as if waiting for her to explain why she'd come. In the darkness, his face was hard to read, his breathing heavy. That alone made Polly feel something was wrong. For some reason, he had reverted to his old, silent self. But even without the light, she could feel how thirsty his gaze was, how much he longed for her. Polly couldn't figure out what was going through his mind. "Why aren't you in bed?" she asked with a smile. "Or are you waiting for me to tuck you in?" Erik said nothing. Polly couldn't stand the dark, tense atmosphere anymore. She turned on the lights, using her phone. When the lights came on, Erik blinked, startled. Polly wasn't sure what he was surprised about. She'd installed the smart home app on his phone too. But soon he looked down and handed her a piece of sheet music with a gloved hand. Polly was puzzled. She took it. It was a vocal score. She hummed it in her head. It sounded like an aria from an opera, but the vocal range was quite high, not really suited to her voice. "What's this for?" she asked. Erik replied flatly, "Sing it for me." Polly blinked. "Me? What kind of request was that in the middle of the night? Who else would I be asking?" He said. Polly stiffened. Now she was sure something was off. Erik never spoke to her like this. Unless It was when they had just met. His tone was so cold, so abrupt, that her own softened tone vanished. "I don't sing opera. I can't sing this." "What can you sing then?" he asked. If his last line had simply made her uncomfortable, the faint condescension in this one made her downright angry. Polly stared at him, baffled. She checked the time on her phone, then stood up. "It's late. Sleep if you want." It was the first time she'd spoken to him like that. She expected him to grab her hand and apologize, maybe explain his bad attitude. But instead, he just looked at her once and turned away. Polly didn't say another word. She left the music room without looking back. Only after the door closed did Erik feel like he could breathe normally again. Polly was dangerous. He was utterly powerless against her presence. She seemed to have a fatal hold over him. When he didn't see her, the agitation was unbearable, to the point he couldn't even play piano properly. But when she was near, her effect on him made him uneasy in a different way. All that restlessness just vanished. That level of influence was like a leash wrapped around his neck, controlling his every move. So he resisted instinctively, and that's when he realized his former self had written many love songs, but very few for singing, which meant Polly probably didn't sing or wasn't good at it. Maybe, if he just heard her sing, he'd snap out of it. But when she actually left the room, a burning guilt flared in his chest. Why did he feel guilty? That had been the kindest attitude he'd ever shown a mediocre person. And still, this body seemed to think she didn't deserve such treatment. His former self must have been completely blinded by desire. Erik's expression was blank, but a strange, persistent ache weighed on his chest like a bruise that wouldn't go away. Back in the bedroom, Polly had calmed down. She was usually emotionally stable and rarely lost her temper. Otherwise, she never could have lasted this long with Erik. She poured herself a glass of cold water, took a few sips, and slowly pulled herself out of the confusion and anger. First of all, she had to acknowledge that Erik's attitude toward her had changed dramatically. His expression hadn't changed, nor had his behavior, but his attitude toward her was clearly different. She thought back to how he'd woken her up last night with a knife, how he shoved her into a wall earlier that day while wearing his mask, and just now, he'd been wearing black leather gloves while playing piano, with every button on his shirt buttoned to the top. Since they got married, he only wore black gloves to tease her, and even then, he only put them on after tossing her onto the bed, putting on a little show for her. So, what happened? Why was he back to wearing masks and gloves like he used to? That's when Polly remembered. Right after they returned to the modern world, Erik sometimes forgot where he was, even thinking he was still in the Paris Opera House, waiting for her return. A ridiculous thought crossed her mind. Could he have lost his memory? If he had, then everything would make sense. Why he wore the mask in the middle of the night. Why he woke her with a knife. Why he disappeared the next morning. Why he treated her so coldly. And why her kisses made him look at her with such a complicated expression. So he'd lost his memory. Polly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. No wonder he was being so distant. When they first met, he was practically a beast, completely inhuman. Back then, his aggression went far beyond grabbing her wrist or pushing her. He'd nearly killed her more than once. Now that Erik had reverted to that dangerous early version of himself, Polly couldn't help but find it a little exciting. Maybe she was being overly optimistic, but her first thought was, he must really love her, so much that even after losing his memory and becoming the old Erik again, he still couldn't bring himself to hurt her. Thinking that made Polly suddenly want to tease him. But remembering what he'd said, she decided to give him the cold shoulder for a couple of days first. What did he mean by, "What can you sing?" Had he forgotten their whole relationship? She hadn't won him over with singing. It was him who had gone to great lengths to seduce her again and again. The next morning, Polly didn't go looking for Erik. She made breakfast for herself. Then she changed into a t-shirt and shorts and went out for a morning jog. Although the town wasn't large and it wasn't tourist season, there were still a few scattered visitors. After her run, Polly bought a coffee, found a seat, took out her phone, and planned to go watch a movie later. She was someone who enjoyed solitude. Even without Erik by her side, she felt perfectly content. Watching a movie alone was no problem at all. Just then, a male voice spoke above her head. "Is this seat taken?" Polly looked up. It was a young white man with a slightly aggressive air. He was wearing a workout tee, a light sheen of sweat on his neck. Clearly had just finished exercising. Polly looked back down at her phone, still browsing movies. "Nope. Mind if I sit here?" The cafe was packed in the morning. It was the busiest time of day, so wanting to share a table wasn't unusual. "Go ahead," Polly said. The young man sat across from her. He pretended to sip his coffee and scroll his phone, but in reality, he kept sneaking glances at her. Polly was long used to being stared at by strangers and didn't pay much attention. Back when she traveled around with Erik, she used to draw plenty of stares too. At first, Erik would get murderous toward those people, but over time he got used to it. At most, he'd coolly remark, "You all seem very interested in my wife." Of course, his newfound calm also came from the way she always knew how to soothe him. Whenever his jealousy flared, before he could say anything crazy, she'd kiss him and bring him back down. Clearly, the current version of Erik wasn't getting that kind of treatment. After browsing for a while, Polly found a newly released horror movie, bought a ticket, and planned to head to the theater later. The young man saw the movie poster flash briefly on her screen and asked with a smile, "What movie are you seeing this early?" Polly didn't appreciate his snooping and replied coolly, "What's it to you?" "Sorry, I was just curious." Polly didn't respond. Her disinterest was obvious, but the man didn't seem to notice. He stared at her for a moment and suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, I remember why you looked familiar. You live across from my grandma's place." Now, Polly had to acknowledge him. In the West, especially in sparsely populated tourist towns, neighborly relationships were extremely important. So, when she first moved in, she made a point to visit her neighbors one by one, hoping for some mutual support, like having someone help rake leaves or trim the yard if she was away for a long time. Living across from her was a kind, elderly couple who occasionally brought her homemade snacks and treats. "You know Mrs. Cohen?" Polly asked. "She's my grandma," the young man said, finally introducing himself. "I'm Jeffrey. My grandma always talks about you, says you're kind and helpful, really sweet." Out of politeness, Polly smiled at him for the first time. Jeffrey kept praising her, trying to chat her up, when he suddenly noticed the bruises on her wrist, a purple ring of marks, as if someone had gripped her too tightly, leaving 5 distinct black and blue finger marks. Jeffrey immediately remembered what his grandma once said, "That girl across the street is lovely, but her husband seems a bit off." So this was what off meant. He leaned in and whispered, "Miss Polly, do you need legal help?" "Huh?" Polly blinked. "My uncle's a lawyer, really good with divorce cases. He could get you a restraining order, make sure your husband never comes near you again." Polly followed his gaze and looked at the bruise on her wrist. She couldn't help but chuckle. No, I'm fine. I just banged it accidentally. It's not domestic violence. But thanks for your concern." Just then, her movie was about to start. Polly picked up her coffee, nodded at Jeffrey, and left. The moment she walked out of the cafe, she suddenly froze. A strong sensation of being watched surged over her. Since their relationship stabilized, Erik had rarely spied on her. If he wanted something, he would walk right up and ask for it. Polly had felt a little regretful about that, thought it had made things less exciting. But now that he'd lost his memory, he'd gone back to stalking and lurking. If she'd known he was so obsessed with tracking her, she would have chatted with Jeffrey a little longer just to mess with him. Polly didn't take Erik's stalking seriously. She headed to the movie theater, picked up her ticket, and arrived at the screening room 3 minutes before the movie started. It was early in the day, and the film was a horror flick, so the theater was completely empty. Polly chose a seat right in the middle. The lights dimmed. It was a generic American slasher movie. A group of people goes camping in the woods and encounters a serial killer. Same old formula. American horror films often like to have characters die mid-sex. Whether to appeal to religious guilt or just for shock value, the trope was always the same. They'd committed a sinful act and must pay for it, with death. But since Polly was an atheist and hadn't grown up immersed in that kind of religious guilt, she never found those scenes oppressive. To her, it didn't even seem like much of a sin. In fact, she watched horror movies precisely for that kind of twisted punishment of original sin. Halfway through the film, the body count began. The first to die was a black actress. While kissing another female character, she was sliced clean in half. Polly blinked, her lashes fluttering. Suddenly, she found herself missing Erik. A second later, that familiar male scent surrounded her. Speak of the devil. In the darkness, a tall figure walked up and sat beside her. Polly knew Erik's presence too well. Even without a word from him, she could recognize him by scent alone. Not to mention, his intense gaze was locked onto her, his breathing thick and palpable. On screen, the slaughter began. The main characters ran for their lives, Blood sprayed everywhere. Dismembered limbs filled the screen. Cliched script, cheap effects, bland acting. Fortunately, the real horror movie protagonist was sitting right next to her. Polly still got her thrill. She never made things hard for herself. Even though she decided to give Erik the cold shoulder, that didn't mean she couldn't kiss him. So she turned to him, grabbed his collar without hesitation. He seemed surprised, instinctively lowering his head slightly. But really, they both knew the truth. If he hadn't allowed it, how could she possibly pull him down? In the flickering light, Polly pulled off his mask, cupped his jaw, and tilted her head up to kiss him. Their lips met, breath mingled. Erik stared at her, unmoving, his breathing heavy, so much so it seemed to exceed what his body could handle. Polly tried to pry his lips open, but he refused. She gave his cheek a gentle slap. "Open your mouth." He paused, then suddenly grabbed her wrists and pinned them against the seat back, leaned down and fiercely tangled his tongue with hers. The intense pressure of their lips and tongues made her ears flush red. On screen, the final girl turned the tables, taking down the killer just before dying. Polly suddenly realized this was probably their first kiss since Erik lost his memory. As the credits rolled and the lights came on, Polly quickly put his mask back on. At the same moment, a theater employee walked in to clean. Seeing them, he didn't bat an eye. The theater had cameras. He'd probably seen what happened, but didn't care. Just assumed they were an eccentric couple with a kink for horror-themed makeouts. Polly looked up at Erik. After the kiss, his eyes were burning hotter than ever, molten and sticky, as if trying to suffocate her with intensity. But he said nothing, like he was resisting the very feelings that overwhelmed him. Polly looked away and got up to leave the theater. Erik, for reasons unknown, followed her, like a tail. People in town noticed Erik's odd appearance, but didn't think much of it. Ever since short-form video platforms became popular, it was normal for people to cosplay movie characters in public. Everyone just assumed he was dressed as a horror film villain, unaware that he was the real thing. Polly stopped by the supermarket to buy some snacks to munch on while gaming later. She knew her limits in the kitchen. Simple meals were fine, but she'd quickly get sick of them, especially after being spoiled by Erik's cooking. Living in a town like this was great, except there was no food delivery, and even hiring someone to mow the lawn or fix a leak took months. If Erik hadn't been so good at everything, she wouldn't have lasted a single day here. Carrying her snacks, Polly walked home while wondering how she might trick amnesiac Erik into cooking for her again. Just as she reached the door, a voice called out from behind. "Miss Polly!" She turned and saw Jeffrey running over from across the street. He reached her side quickly and pulled her behind him. "There's a masked man following you. Didn't you notice?" Polly felt Jeffrey was being a bit too helpful. He knew she had a husband. She almost wanted to explain Erik's identity, but remembered that Jeffrey thought she was a domestic violence victim. And now, seeing Erik masked and tailing her, he'd probably imagine even worse, and maybe call the police. So she said, "That's my little brother. We were just playing cosplay." "Why?" Jeffrey froze. Erik also paused mid-step. "Oh, I see," Jeffrey said awkwardly. "He's your brother." Still a little worried, he added, "If you ever need help, I'm right across the street." It was well-intentioned, and Polly didn't want to be too cold. She smiled. "Thank you. But really, it's not what you think." Just then, Erik walked up beside her. His tall frame completely shadowed Polly, exuding such an overwhelming presence that Jeffrey was instantly pushed out of the picture. For a second, it felt like he'd encountered a natural predator. A chill ran up his spine, and he instinctively took 2 steps back. Polly sensed Erik's growing impatience and decided to end it. She opened the door. "Goodbye, Jeffrey." Jeffrey's throat tightened. "Goodbye." Polly let Erik in first, then followed and closed the door behind her. And the moment the door shut, before she could even put down her groceries, Erik reached out, cupped her jaw, leaned down, and kissed her hard. Polly froze. Before Erik's lips could touch hers, she turned her head and avoided the kiss. Forget the fact that they were still in the middle of a Cold War. He hadn't even taken off his mask and already wanted to kiss her? That was just absurd. Erik didn't even realize he still had the mask on. He remained bent over her, eyes behind the white mask staring at her intently. That greedy, nearly sharp gaze made her heart skip a beat. It reminded her oddly of something she saw on a nature documentary, like the look on a lion's face when hyenas snatched its kill. Frustrated, unwilling, powerless. it was kind of amusing. Polly stifled a laugh, pried his hand off her chin, and slipped out of his arms. Erik didn't say a word. Polly said nothing either. She headed upstairs, took a shower, and changed into clean, comfortable pajamas. Then she went back downstairs and made herself a simple meal: roast beef with buckwheat noodles. The sauce had been pre-mixed by Erik. All she had to do was pour it over. After cooking, Polly carried the porcelain bowl to her desk and prepared to play games while eating. Before time traveling, she had passed the time by streaming horror games online. Initially, she hoped to be noticed by a game company and maybe land a role doing motion capture or voice acting. Later on, she just did it for fun. In the West, actors who weren't movie stars or longtime cast members in hit TV shows usually didn't get much recognition, let alone someone like Polly, a mixed-race actress stuck playing bit parts for years. So after streaming for a couple of months, she had only about 100 viewers. But ever since returning to the modern world, her gamer itch returned, and she started streaming horror games again. Maybe it was because she stayed so calm, didn't even flinch when monsters jumped out at her. Her viewer count suddenly shot up to over 1,000. This platform didn't inflate numbers. 1,000 meant a real 1,000 viewers. A mini breakout. Too bad it came too late. Polly no longer needed fame or money. She'd left herself enough fortune in the 19th century to keep her and Erik comfortable for several lifetimes. Streaming now was purely to satisfy her vanity. After all, she hadn't been fearless from birth. It was years of immersive horror training that toughened her up. There were times she'd almost peed herself from fright. It would be a shame not to show off a little. Polly didn't point the camera at herself, just at her simple dinner. Then she randomly selected a horror game. The premise was to solve puzzles and escape an apartment. It went viral because the developers were wicked, timing jump scares to hit players at the most focused moments. Plenty of streamers had been spooked into screaming and pounding their keyboards. Maximum entertainment value. But Polly thought it was the perfect game to eat with. All jump scares, no chase sequences, great for casual playing over dinner. Viewers watching her eat and play couldn't help but comment. Did the streamer have her fear glands removed or what? How are you eating through this? I'm new here. Is this a mukbang channel or horror gameplay? Polly ignored them and kept solving puzzles while munching away. Just as she was about to win, a terrifying ghost face suddenly flashed on screen, gone in less than half a second. Then a question popped up. What color were the ghost's teeth? Polly instantly chose the correct answer. The chat blew up. That jump scare got me good. She didn't even flinch. Are we sure the bottom right isn't a pre-recorded video? Curious what she does IRL to be this fearless. Then a strange comment scrolled by. It looks like someone's behind the streamer. Spooky fake-out comments were common in horror game streams, so at first no one took it seriously. But slowly, people began to notice. It really did seem like someone was standing behind her. The figure was tall, dressed in a long black coat, wearing black leather gloves, standing motionless behind Polly. Even though only the lower half was visible, a chilling, dangerous aura radiated from him, like he might reach out at any moment and strangle her. Polly, however, seemed completely unaware. Someone commented, "Feels like a horror movie scene." Others agreed. It wasn't until Polly finished her meal and beat the game that she realized Erik had been standing behind her the entire time, silently watching her play. By then, the chat had completely derailed. Because there had been cases of streamers faking paranormal events for views, people assumed Polly was doing the same, and the comments were full of angry accusations. Plus, Erik's presence seemed to disrupt the camera, causing occasional flickers. The chat assumed it was a deliberate creepy effect and got even more hostile. Back when she played games, Erik had never entered her room. He disliked mirrors, let alone cameras. Only when physically connected to her would he reluctantly tolerate their presence. This was the first time Polly realized Erik could actually disrupt live stream signal quality, which honestly fit perfectly with classic horror movie tropes. What else could you expect from a real-life horror protagonist? Seeing the comments spiral out of control, Polly quickly grabbed Erik's hand, lifted it into view, and kissed his black glove on camera. Then she said, "All right, enough guessing. He's my husband. Bad connection today. Logging off." With that, she ended the stream and got up to wash the dishes. But before she could take a step, Erik suddenly reached out and pressed her back into her seat. Polly blinked, looking up at him. He still wore the white mask, but the gaze behind it was no longer distant and cold. It was scorching, like it could burn holes into her face. A strange mix of emotion welled up in Polly. She'd started this Cold War just to test how much she mattered to him. She expected to wait 2 or 3 days to see a result. Yet not even 1 day had passed, and he was already cracking. She remembered how long it had taken before. Nearly 2 weeks of hot and cold treatment before it finally worked. This stark contrast filled her with indescribable satisfaction. Pretending not to understand his look, she asked, "Something you need?" Erik looked down at her from above. He rarely felt the need to speak. Wherever language existed, there were misunderstandings and biases. Every word he said risked being misunderstood. So why say anything? But somehow, whenever he saw Polly, the urge to speak was overwhelming. As if she could truly hear what he meant, truly understand his needs, and truly give him the comfort he craved. Seeing him silent, Polly was about to push him off again. Suddenly, he leaned in close and said slowly, "What am I to you?" So, he had finally cracked. Polly replied, "I don't understand what you mean. Why did you tell that man I'm your brother?" he asked. Polly put down the bowl, her voice calm and unhurried. "What do you think?" Erik stared at her, breathing heavy for a moment, but said nothing. He told himself long ago to leave her. So why did his chest hurt like this when she asked him that? It was purely to relieve that pain that he pressed further. "Aren't we husband and wife?" Polly gave him a sweet smile. "I was married to the previous Erik. As for you? Not so sure." This time she easily pushed his hand away, her tone light. "Did you think I couldn't recognize my own husband?" Erik didn't reply, nor did he follow her. Polly picked up her bowl, went downstairs, and dropped it in the sink, planning to toss everything into the dishwasher after dinner. She had plenty of experience teasing Erik, knew exactly how far she could push. Rarely did she overdo it. So she never expected that night Erik would actually cook dinner himself, a table full of rich, fragrant dishes, then stand silently by, waiting for her. Polly. What was this now? Had he recovered his memory? She hadn't even finished having fun yet. But Erik's response was even more absurd than memory recovery. He tilted his head slightly, glanced at the oven in the open kitchen, a hint of disdain in his eyes, though Polly had no idea what he was sneering at. After a long silence, he said, "Your married life was miserable, wasn't it?" Polly, huh? He went on, "He never made you a proper meal. The music he wrote for you was third-rate garbage." He was probably referring to the garlic butter shrimp. Compared to this feast, sure, it wasn't fancy. But calling the music third-rate garbage? Seriously? Polly was caught between laughter and disbelief, about to respond. But Erik cut her off calmly. "On my first day here, I hurt your wrist, and you didn't even react. Did he do that to you often?" Polly. Not really. She just thought it was time travel trauma and his emotions were unstable. So she hadn't taken it seriously. If it were a normal day, she'd have slapped him across the face. "He didn't even tell you he dislikes light-colored clothing," Erik added coolly. "Your marriage was fragile, full of lies. You'd be better off with me." He stepped closer, towering over her, his presence pressing down like a physical weight. Whatever he'd imagined, he clearly believed now that he was a completely different person. Behind the white mask, his eyes held a strange, repressed madness. "After all, I am him?" Polly. For a moment, she genuinely couldn't tell if she'd pushed too far, or not far enough. Polly's lips twitched slightly. On the one hand, she wanted to see how Erik would try to replace himself. On the other hand, she worried that once he regained his memory, he'd use this against her. Interrogate her for why she'd been indulging young Erik so much. Oh well, no matter how it turned out, it was bound to be exciting. To hell with it. Polly deliberately took a step back and said cautiously, "What makes you say our marriage is built on lies?" In the past, whenever she took a step back, he would always advance one step, an almost conditioned response. Sure enough, the moment she retreated, Erik reached out and gripped the back of her head, forcing her to look into the eye sockets of the white mask. "Did your husband ever tell you he used to make a living by killing people?" Polly didn't know whether to answer yes or no. Both options led to totally different outcomes. It was hard to choose. But she didn't have to decide. Erik had already chosen for her, apparently not. Polly felt her acting skills had grown rusty. She almost burst out laughing. She quickly lowered her head and cleared her throat. Whether it was the memory loss or something else, Erik's patience was clearly worse than before. In less than a second, he grabbed her chin and forced her to look up. He pretended to be slow-witted and harmless in front of you. If that's not lying, what is? Behind the white mask, his gaze was unusually calm, as if describing his future self as harmless and dull was perfectly normal. Polly had to hold her breath with all her might to stop herself from laughing. Suddenly, she became curious. Why was Erik so convinced he wasn't just suffering from memory loss, but was an entirely different person? Sure, he changed over the years, but not to the point of becoming someone completely new. Surely it wasn't just because he couldn't accept the idea of wearing light-colored clothes? Polly nearly laughed again and quickly looked down to stifle it. Erik was watching her closely, not wanting to miss a single change in her expression. All day, his emotions had been a whirlwind, his chest aching and itching like ants crawling under his skin. When she was talking to Jeffrey, his first instinct wasn't to kill the guy, but to tell Polly that he was jealous. It felt like this wasn't the first time he had demanded compensation from her this way. But why was he jealous? If Polly liked someone else, he'd finally be free of her and could go off and do other things. Yet just thinking that sent a sharp pain through his chest, so intense he could hardly breathe. It didn't make sense. They'd only known each other for 2 days. If all his strange reactions to Polly were just side effects of this body, then the most logical move would be to kill her. And yet, not only could he not kill her, he couldn't even imagine what it would be like to hurt her. Just picturing her dead made his mind go blank, his breathing ragged, and his heart freeze over. By the time he came back to his senses, Polly had already left the cafe and was heading somewhere else. Who else did she want to see? Erik watched her and followed, almost involuntarily. She walked into a small, run-down theater. No statues, no chandeliers, just the sweet smell of popcorn in the air. The ticket taker was also the snack seller, lazy and inattentive. Erik easily bypassed the check-in and slipped inside. The auditorium was huge and pitch black. Suddenly, deafening music exploded through the space. A harsh white spotlight lit up the massive screen ahead, and a terrifyingly lifelike image appeared. Erik stood at the back row, staring at the screen. It seemed to be a play, but not about Christ, royal courts, or mythology. Instead, it was a gruesome, brutal story. A group of young men and women went camping. They spoke boldly, behaved intimately, and all stripped down to tiny swimsuits to swim in the lake. Erik had no idea what kind of era he was in. Here, people exposed their arms, legs, even their chests and stomachs. Did this mean he had once worn such clothes in front of Polly? His ears began to burn uncontrollably. A fierce sense of shame swelled inside him. Yet, instead of making him turn away from Polly, it sparked an impulse to question her. Why was she watching their bodies instead of his? Erik was shocked by his own thoughts. Why would he think something so strange? As the minutes passed, the scene shifted. Tense, ominous music played. A cloaked man appeared in the corner of the screen, breathing heavily as he lurked, watching the carefree campers. What happened next completely shocked Erik. The cloaked man pulled out a long knife, crept toward a couple, and drove it straight through the man. Blood gushed out. In the next shot, the man had been split in half, guts spilling everywhere, a pool of gore. Erik stared coldly at the scene, thinking, so this era treats evil as entertainment? Did no one worry that God might punish them for watching such things? As the images grew more horrific, Erik found himself wanting to see Polly's expression. What was she feeling while watching this? Revulsion? Fear? He stepped forward and sat beside her. But before he could clearly see her face, she suddenly grabbed his collar, pulled off his mask, and kissed him. Erik froze, his entire body paralyzed. A moment later, she whispered in his ear, "Open your mouth." His mind exploded into static. He reached behind her head, instinctively deepening the kiss, chasing after her tongue. On screen, the violence grew louder and more intense. The movie neared its end. The heroine was cornered by darkness. She seemed doomed. But predators often get careless when prey is near death. Finally, the cloaked man was shot several times and collapsed. The blood-soaked heroine fled to her car and left the slaughtered campsite behind. Polly ended the kiss, quickly replaced his mask, and stood up as if nothing had happened. Erik watched her go, still tasting the lingering wetness of the kiss. Only then did it hit him. She kissed him. Why? She had seen his face. She had kissed his face. She knew how he looked, and yet she still kissed him. Not in disgust, but with desire. Erik couldn't describe what he was feeling. The sticky warmth of the kiss seemed to seep into his heart, making even his heartbeat feel slow and thick. But when they got home, and he, driven by jealousy, tried to kiss her, she pushed him away. Why? What exactly was their relationship? If it were just a kiss, he wouldn't be this emotionally shaken. But her rejection. Within a minute, it was like he went into withdrawal. His heart raced, his hands trembled. He wanted to demand answers from her. Why was she treating him this way? Erik squeezed his eyes shut, forcing down the urge. While she was upstairs showering, he combed through the villa for signs of life. Sure enough, he found a hidden trapdoor. Inside was an arsenal, modern pistols, ropes, combat knives. The floor thick with dust. Polly probably had no idea a weapons cache was hidden in her own home. He even found a pair of silver handcuffs, padded with soft leather on the inside, not meant for intruders, meant for her. So this relationship was built on lies. Polly had no idea what kind of man her husband really was. At that moment, a thought popped into Erik's mind, completely unprompted. Since her husband had treated her so badly, maybe he could take his place. He never once believed they were the same person. There was no way he could have a future like this. A person might have many possible futures. Good, bad, fulfilled, lonely, but something this good could never belong to him. Even if that Erik had lied to win Polly over, he was still 100 times luckier than Erik. He envied that kind of luck. And then Polly said she'd known all along that he wasn't her husband. He closed his eyes, feeling like he'd fallen into an ice-cold pit. So he really didn't have that kind of luck. But why? They were the same person, and also not the same. Why was that Erik allowed to have her, and he wasn't? This time, Erik's jealousy was overwhelming. His vision swam. His body ached from head to toe. By the time he came to his senses, he had already confronted Polly and forced her to be with him. But Polly kept lowering her head, avoiding his eyes. She never did that when she didn't know who he was. Erik's jealousy spiraled out of control. He leaned closer, unable to restrain himself. Why aren't you saying anything? Polly finally looked up at him. Why do you think he never told me all that? Erik froze. I'm with him because I know everything, Polly said. I've heard what you just said 100 times over. Then she walked past him, sat at the table, and tasted the meal cooked by the young Erik. Pretty tasty. While eating, she called out to him, Aren't you eating? Erik didn't answer. His voice, when it came, was cold as ice. I never eat in front of people. You sure? Polly said. My husband never says no to eating with me. She had no idea how she managed to say such shameless things. But she was fully committed to the bit now. Erik went quiet for a while, then sat down across from her. Polly, you're going to eat with the mask on? You won't lose your appetite looking at my face? He said coldly. I've been looking at it for years, Polly shot back. Take a guess. Do I look disgusted? Erik paused for dozens of seconds, then stiffly removed his mask. His breathing quickened. He instinctively turned his head, hiding the disfigured side of his face. Polly tried. She really did. But she couldn't hold it in. She burst out laughing, shoulders shaking, nearly dropping her fork. Erik looked at her coldly, completely at a loss. Polly stood, walked behind him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed the scarred side of his face. You dummy. I'm not teasing you anymore. You are the same person. We've been together for years. I know everything about you. Why would you think you're someone else? Erik was silent for a long time, as if he couldn't comprehend what she'd just said. What? Polly kissed him again before sitting down, smiling as she said, Even before we ever met, I already knew everything about you. Erik propped his head up with one hand, his thumb brushing the spot she'd kissed. After a long pause, he finally said, You think I'll believe that? Polly cut a piece of steak. You were born in Rouen, France. The first gift you ever received was a mask. Your parents? Her voice dropped. They couldn't bear to look at your face, so they sent you to a sanatorium and told everyone you were insane, that you'd eventually lose control and kill someone. This was the only piece of backstory not found in the original story. Perhaps it was this very part that created the horror movie version of him. Polly sighed. You found a way to escape, traveled all over Europe, even made it as far as India, where you learned how to use the Punjab lasso. Eventually, you settled in the Mazandaran palace and served the Qajar dynasty. You built torture chambers for the king, demonstrated how to kill with a rope, and turned the palace into a booby-trapped labyrinth. But the king grew fearful of your intelligence and decided to kill you. It was Daroga who saved you. Polly reached out and clasped his hand. Daroga found a corpse with a destroyed face to fake your death, smuggled you out of the palace, and you escaped with a circus manager to America. That manager was Dawes. Erik's fingers trembled slightly. Their hands were noticeably mismatched in size. When their fingers intertwined, her entire hand couldn't even cover the back of his. And yet, under her touch, he slowly calmed down. To anyone else, being used, betrayed, and living among corpses would be unbearable. But to you, it was probably the only time in your life that held a bit of beauty. Erik suddenly looked up. His gaze toward her noticeably changed. Polly said softly, "You may seem cold and ruthless, indifferent to life and death, but deep down you're a person who repays kindness, whether it's to me or to that circus manager. That's why, even though the circus people constantly gave you a hard time, you never stooped to their level. You tried to kill me several times, but never went through with it, because after you were dragged by that horse, I was the one who treated your wounds." Erik stared at her, unmoving. His eyes blazed with an intensity that was terrifying, but the hand gripping her fingers suddenly tightened. Polly winced and yanked her hand back, glaring at him. She took a sip of juice before continuing. "Because of your appearance, you never considered yourself fully human, but you cherish kindness more than anyone else. We once lived at the Paris Opera House. There was an old lady there, everyone called her Madame Giry. She was the only one who treated you with respect. On the surface, you acted cold toward her, barely acknowledging her, but behind the scenes, you helped her daughter Meg Giry get promoted to second-tier performer." Polly picked up her utensils and cut another piece of steak. "So now, do you believe we're really in love?" Erik stared at her, his breath short and shallow, so agitated that he seemed unable to breathe properly. Polly decided to give him some time to process, lowered her head, and focused on enjoying her steak. After finishing, she moved on to the chicken wings. Erik's wings were always seasoned with honey, rosemary, and white wine, pan-fried until golden. Sweet and spicy, incredibly flavorful. Polly couldn't help but complain, "Good thing I'm not acting anymore. If I kept eating like this, I'd be out of a job in no time." Erik suddenly said, "I can fix that." "Polly, fix what?" "Whoever fires you, I'll fix them." Polly's lips twitched. "Let's not. I forgot to tell you, it's 2026 now. This is a society ruled by law. It's been 138 years since the lawless days of 1888. If you try anything reckless, the police will chase you to the ends of the earth." Erik went quiet. Polly thought for a moment and added, "There are some law books in the study. Go read them when you get a chance. If you end up behind bars, I'm not waiting around." Erik paused. "You won't wait for me?" Polly shrugged. "If you get locked up, I'll move on. Find someone else." At that, Erik's breathing immediately grew erratic, and his eyes almost turned a blazing gold, on the verge of losing control. Afraid he'd faint from rage, Polly quickly added, Okay, I was joking." Erik turned his head, took a deep breath, and after a long moment said, "I believe you, but I'm still jealous." Polly froze. Jealous of what? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up as if to clear the table. Polly raised an eyebrow. "You haven't even eaten yet. Sit down. Don't try to weasel out of it." Erik had no choice but to sit back down and pick up his utensils to start cutting into the steak. Polly had seen him cook. His knife skills were always calm and precise. Every slice of meat even and clean. His control over the blade was terrifying. But now, his hands were shaking. He tried for a long time but couldn't even slice off a piece of steak. Polly sighed, got up, and took the utensils from him. She cut the steak and brought a bite to his lips. Erik looked at her. Maybe it was from holding his breath for too long, but his eyes had reddened slightly. Paired with his sharp features and disfigured face, he looked almost cute. Polly laughed. "What? You need me to say, 'ah,' before you'll eat?" Erik lowered his head, seemingly ready to take the bite. But in the next moment, he suddenly grabbed the back of her head and pulled her down, kissing her hard. His tongue immediately invaded her mouth, aggressively entangling with hers. Polly instinctively dropped the utensils and pressed against his chest. But he grabbed her hand, long fingers slipping between hers, locking them tightly together. The entire time, his eyes never left hers. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed again and again. That desperate intensity almost made Polly blush. No wonder people liked the younger version. Young men really were something else. When the kiss finally ended, Erik pulled her into his arms and rested his head on her shoulder, breathing heavily. His breath was so hot that Polly's skin felt scorched, like she'd been burned by steam. It actually stung a little. Startled, she reached up and gently lifted his face. Erik didn't resist. He let her tilt his face up, revealing slightly reddened eyes. He was crying. Polly's breath caught, her chest tightening with pain. All she'd done was retell his life story, and he'd gotten so emotional, so happy, that he cried. "You big baby." Her voice was hoarse as she leaned down and kissed his eyelid. But Erik seemed to take it as a signal. He grabbed her face and kissed her again. This time, he didn't know how to kiss properly. All he could do was hungrily suck at her lips, nearly driving her breathless before he finally let go. Only their ragged breathing remained. The sound of their breaths mingling made her feel dizzy. Polly couldn't help stepping back, but Erik immediately reacted, clutching her waist and refusing to let her retreat even an inch. Polly gave up. Okay, I won't move." Erik closed his eyes, panting softly. He hadn't lied. He believed they were married now, but he was still jealous. Jealous of his future self, who got to meet Polly. Even though they were the same person, he felt like an outsider, as if none of this was truly his. That someone in the world could know everything about his past and still love him. Someone who was willing to eat with him, kiss his disfigured face. His future self was so lucky. He couldn't believe this life was really his. So instead, he was jealous. And deep down he had a gut feeling that this kind of happy ending wasn't meant for him. Someone like him should have died in some dark, forgotten corner. Having someone find the body and bury it would have been a blessing. Happiness was far too extravagant a reward for someone like him. No wonder his heart raced the moment he saw Polly. No wonder her scent made his mind go blank, like he was addicted. And who wouldn't be addicted to happiness? His jealousy ran so deep, Erik even wished he would never recover his memory. Only then would Polly keep looking at him, instead of the future version. He knew the thought was ridiculous. But just imagining the day he'd remember everything, and become that future self, while this version faded from Polly's heart, was enough to tear him apart with jealousy. Polly only realized Erik was jealous of himself when it was already midnight. She'd just taken a shower, changed into a nightgown, and curled up under the covers. Erik was sitting beside her with a pen in hand, trying to compose a song, something less cheesy than his usual melodies. But every time he thought of her, the notes turned thick and syrupy, dripping with sugar, making his own skin crawl. Polly blinked at him, then snuggled up from behind and reached down, quietly wrapping her hand around that. The reaction was instant. Erik jolted like he'd been electrocuted, turned his head, and stared at her in disbelief. Polly played innocent. "What's wrong?" Erik was stunned speechless, scalp tingling. In the dim light, he clutched his pen but couldn't write a single note. His ears flushed bright red, his breathing unsteady. It took him a long while to calm down and resume writing. But then Polly kissed the scarred side of his face and gently ran her fingernails across it. It felt like someone had grabbed his heart. His whole scalp tightened, and he curled forward in spasms. Polly blinked, just about to tease him, when Erik suddenly grabbed her hand and yanked her down. She tumbled onto his lap, gazing up at him. Their eyes met. A sticky, dangerous heat spread through the air. Erik loomed over her, voice dark and low, almost mocking. "Just now. Were you thinking of me or him?" "Polly." "Huh?" Erik's expression was cold as his fingers slowly tightened around hers. "Did you have fun these past few days?" Polly's hands weren't small. Her fingers were long and fair, but because of the size difference between them, when he gripped her palm, hers looked like a child's in comparison. She blinked at his question, a bit dazed. "What?" Erik didn't respond. He simply pulled her closer, stared at her up close for a moment, then turned and got out of bed, seemingly heading for a shower. His collar was slightly open, revealing his sweat-slicked chest. Under the dim light, his skin glistened with an oddly sticky sheen. Upon closer inspection, it wasn't sweat. It was something she had accidentally smeared on him with her hand. No wonder when he passed by her, his scent was so intense it nearly made her dizzy. Polly followed him, but Erik suddenly stopped and grabbed her wrist. "What are you doing?" Polly opened her palm innocently. "Washing my hands." "Or would you rather I just go to bed like this?" Erik immediately let go. Polly followed him into the bathroom, washing her hands while stealing glances at his expression. He didn't seem to be thinking about anything. His face was blank as he took off his sleepwear and tossed it aside. A sudden thought struck Polly. Had he regained his memory? If he were still amnesiac, he wouldn't be so casual about showing his body. It was likely that when he lost his memory, he thought of himself as someone else. And now that he remembered, he'd treat that version of himself as another person. She broke into a sweat, suddenly feeling like someone caught in the act. Clearing her throat, she tentatively asked, "You remember everything now?" Steam filled the bathroom. He didn't look at her, seemingly focused on his shower, as if he hadn't heard her. Hot water streamed over his firm chest, reddening his skin and making his veins stand out. Polly blinked, just about to help him scrub his back, when he gave her a sideways glance and shut the frosted glass door. Polly. Yeah, he definitely remembered. And he was definitely mad. She slunk back to the bedroom, playing on her phone while waiting for him to come out. Half an hour later, Erik emerged. Perhaps still stewing in anger, he hadn't dried himself off properly. Water still dripped from him, and he wore only a loosely tied bath towel. That erased any lingering doubts Polly had. If he were still amnesiac, there was no way he'd walk out like that. Polly blinked, moved closer, and took his hand, switching to a cutesy tone. "Are you really mad?" He paused. "No." "Then why are you ignoring me?" He didn't answer, as if he hadn't heard her. Polly chuckled and stood up, reaching to take the towel off his neck. He turned slightly, avoiding her touch. Polly teased, "If you're not mad, careful. I might get mad." This time, the towel came off easily. Holding back a grin, she ordered him to sit down and started drying his hair. Erik closed his eyes and let her fuss over him. Ever since Polly first cut his hair, she had been the one maintaining it. She actually enjoyed it, being able to trim and style it however she liked. Any trendy look she saw online, she could immediately try on him. She loved the feeling of having control over his head. His hair was thick and coarse, almost like the fur of a large animal. After quite a while, she finally got it decently dry. She couldn't resist running her fingers through his hair, gently combing it. Suddenly, he grabbed her hand. Polly noticed his neck was covered in goosebumps. She pretended not to notice and tilted her head. "What's wrong?" Erik shut his eyes tightly. His mind was a mess. Though he'd regained his memory, looking back on the past few days made him almost wish he hadn't. After all, whether he had his memory or not, it didn't seem to make a difference to her. Just look at all the things she'd done for that other him. Cooking, kissing, even comforting him when he said he wanted to take Erik's place. Comforted him with her hands. The memory nearly made him scoff aloud. If that was how it was, then why should he even care? He and the other guy weren't any different in her eyes. Erik knew being jealous of himself was absurd, but he couldn't help it. He did have one advantage though. He understood Polly better than his other self ever could. That version, when jealous, would only hurt her. But Erik, he would use his ugly side to please her, because he knew when she saw him jealous, she got even more excited than usual. So, out of nowhere, he said, "You still haven't answered my question. Did you have fun these past few days?" "Fun?" Polly blinked. "Fun doing what?" He said, "Playing with me." Just 5 simple words, yet they made her ears tingle and her heart race. "I didn't play you," Polly said. "If anything, you played me. When you said you wanted to steal your own girl, I was stunned." Then he said, "Why didn't you say no?" "Say no to what?" "To him replacing me. Aren't you the same person?" Polly tried not to laugh. "Why would I say no to you replacing yourself?" "The same person?" He yanked her forward, looked her in the eyes, and asked coolly, "Do you really think we're the same?" At that moment, his expression bordered on unhinged. "You're an actress," he said. "You know better than anyone people are shaped by their experiences. He didn't live what we did, so why would you think we're the same?" Polly. Wow, that was actually a pretty solid argument. She found it both hilarious and weirdly adorable. "So what should I do then?" He let go of her hand, leaned back against the headboard, and said, "Whatever you did to him, do it to me." Polly couldn't tell if it was punishment or reward. "I don't remember what I did." "I'll remind you," he said coolly. "First, kiss my face." Polly braced herself on the bed and gave him a kiss on the cheek. But Erik didn't look happy. because she kissed the unscarred side. With a sigh, Polly grabbed his chin, turned his head, and kissed the scarred side too. Then her hot breath drifted lower, from his chiseled jawline past his Adam's apple, collarbone, and shoulder. Erik grabbed her face, locking eyes with her. Polly's breath continued downward, until it reached a certain spot. Erik's breathing grew heavy, chest rising and falling. He wasn't wearing anything underneath. Polly felt like she had just inhaled minty body wash. She clicked her tongue teasingly. "Kinda sour," Erik replied coldly. "I already showered." "Well," Polly smirked. "Guess the body wash couldn't scrub the vinegar off." He didn't respond, but his Adam's apple bobbed wildly, and his breath grew ragged. Polly was convinced he was doing it on purpose. With this level of stimulation, it should have been easy for him to keep a poker face. Yet every time she kissed him, he let out these faint little gasps. His cold voice, rough breathing, and that barely restrained look of excitement pulled her under like a riptide, and Erik truly was excited. He was insane, no doubt about it. At that moment, he actually thought, what would his past self think if he saw this? That other version of him, the one who believed he didn't deserve happiness. But here he was, with Polly, with happiness his other self had never even dared dream of. He despised himself, hated how he looked. If Polly didn't love him, he probably never would have made peace with his face. So now, flaunting his joy in front of his past self, feeling jealous of himself, it gave him a perverse satisfaction. Polly would never understand. He didn't either. They were the same person, so why the jealousy? Maybe it was because both of them believed that someone like him didn't deserve this kind of happiness. Suddenly, Erik grabbed the back of Polly's head, tilted her face up, and kissed her deeply. It was a kiss of reciprocity. Every place she had kissed, he kissed in return. His breath trailed over her throat like a flame. Polly swallowed, every pore drenched in heat. And then, while still kissing her, he whispered, "Can you tell the difference now?" There was no way she could. "I don't know," Polly said. He stayed calm, lightly teasing her with his teeth. "Keep thinking." Polly racked her brain. "You're not as shy as him?" "Wrong," he said against her skin. "I'm far more shameless than he is." "Try again." "Say that again, I dare you." Polly was about to lose her mind. "I don't know, just tell me already." Erik didn't speak, but with every move he made, he kept asking whether she could tell the difference. If she answered wrong, he intensified it, until her response came close enough. Polly's final verdict? Thrilling, yes, but once a month was more than enough. Any more than that, and she'd be utterly wrecked. That night, she slept like the dead, only waking up the next afternoon. Erik was sitting beside her, quietly watching her. Polly, still groggy, shut her eyes again and clutched his hand. "Not mad anymore, right?" Erik leaned in, his breath brushing her face. Polly, still half asleep, blurted out without thinking, "I promise, next time you lose your memory, I'll stay far away. Happy now?" Erik was silent for a moment. "So, I got my memory back yesterday?" Polly jolted awake. Huh. Polly never expected that Erik would turn out to have intermittent memory loss. Was this even a livable situation? In the days that followed, it was like unboxing mystery toys. Each day brought a different version of Erik. She had to stay hyper alert, racking her brain to say all the right things just to barely keep him calm. It felt like she was back to when they first met. The only difference was, back then, Erik didn't look at her with such wild, manic eyes. The most terrifying moment came when they were in the middle of things, and he suddenly regained his memory, then stared at her for the rest of the time with a look that could chill a soul. Polly. It was the first time she truly understood the phrase, painfully in love. Oh well. When you're dating a madman, a little madness of your own is inevitable. Maybe it was her adaptability kicking in, but Polly slowly got used to this bizarre life. As long as he didn't wake her multiple times a night just to ask who she really loved, things were still fairly blissful. Polly didn't know why Erik's memory kept coming and going, but it was probably due to the time travel. There wasn't a cure anytime soon. She'd just have to tough it out. Thankfully, her mental state was solid. No matter how jealous or unstable Erik got, she could still calmly order him to go cook. And so, half a month passed. Over time, Erik seemed to accept the existence of his other self, or rather, Polly had been led astray by Erik's way of phrasing it. What he actually accepted was that he'd occasionally lose his memory. Polly finally breathed a sigh of relief. At last, she could go out and watch a movie. If she stayed cooped up in the bedroom any longer, she might actually lose her mind. As luck would have it, a new horror movie had just opened at the nearby theater. After dinner, Polly immediately urged Erik to change and head out. Unfortunately, her luck ran out. They ran into Jeffrey from across the street as soon as they stepped outside. Jeffrey's eyes lit up. "Miss Polly, long time no see." Polly smiled politely. "Yes, it's been a while." Erik, now with his memory intact, didn't wear his mask. He faced Jeffrey with the flawless half of his face. Sharp, handsome features, high bridge of his nose, and a chiseled jawline. It was an undeniably attractive face. Jeffrey froze for a second. The last few times he had seen Erik, the man had worn a white mask. Jeffrey had assumed Erik must have been horribly disfigured, too hideous to show his face. He never expected him to look that good. Jeffrey's smile faltered slightly. "Is this your husband?" Just as Polly was about to answer, Erik suddenly turned around and said flatly, "Let's go." Jeffrey, caught off guard, got a full view of Erik's entire face and let out a startled gasp, stumbling back a step. No wonder the man usually wore a mask. One side of his face was sharp and refined, but the other side looked skeletal, deep eye socket, skin like burnt tissue, so deformed it barely looked human. What shocked Jeffrey even more was Polly's reaction. Instead of recoiling in fear, she looked up and kissed Erik's disfigured cheek. Jeffrey had always suspected Polly was being coerced into this relationship. Now he was even more convinced. What woman would willingly kiss a man like that? Wasn't she disgusted? Polly was used to being misunderstood. Back in the 19th century, whenever she and Erik went somewhere new, people always assumed she was with him out of helplessness. To be fair, they probably meant well, but that kind of kindness was patronizing. Society often assumes women are naturally vulnerable, in need of protection and guidance. No matter what they do, people fear they'll be tricked due to lack of experience, like lambs who can't survive without a shepherd. Polly's tone turned frosty. "Jeffrey, is there a reason you keep staring at my husband? Do you have a problem with the way he looks?" Jeffrey froze, his face flushing bright red. He stammered no several times before slinking away in embarrassment. The moment he left, Erik grabbed Polly's nape and kissed her fiercely. He stared into her eyes and devoured her tongue like a madman. The way their tongues tangled and pulled apart, Polly could almost feel invisible strings stretching between them. They clung to each other in front of the villa for nearly 10 minutes, nearly missing the start of the movie. The horror film, probably thanks to a clever marketing campaign, had a decent turnout. Nearly half the seats were filled. Unfortunately, they weren't so lucky. A self-proclaimed film expert sat right in front of them, narrating the entire movie to the girl beside him. Because it was produced and directed by women, the film avoided the usual trope of torturing female characters. Instead, it featured quite a few scenes where male characters were tormented. A few older white men in the audience were so offended they walked out. When the credits rolled and the ending song played, the guy in front of them said loudly, "Totally fake, classic female director fantasy. If I were the killer, I'd never target men. They're too big and heavy, just asking for trouble." Polly blinked and tugged Erik's collar. Her voice wasn't loud, but just enough for the guy to hear. "Babe, when you kill people, do you care if they're male or female?" The guy went quiet immediately. Erik dipped his head. "No." Polly stifled a laugh. "Why not?" "Why would I?" he replied. "So, do you kill more men or more women?" He paused, seemingly calculating. "More men. They provoke me." Polly couldn't help bursting into laughter. Only then did the guy realize he'd been played. He turned in anger. "You two morons, trying to act tough in front of your..." Before he could finish, he met Erik's golden eyes. For one brief second, the guy thought he was staring into the eyes of a serial killer from a movie. No, worse. Not even those killers had eyes this cold and terrifying. It was like a bucket of ice water poured over his soul. He immediately backed down, mumbling, "I don't want trouble," and left in a hurry, not even sparing the girl beside him a glance. Later at home, Polly still chuckled at the memory. Erik glanced at her. "That idiot was really that funny?" "Polly, you must have been a bottle of vinegar in your past life. No wonder your vinaigrette is so delicious." Erik was cooking. Upon hearing that, the muscles in his arm tensed. His tone was dry. "What, regretting marrying me now?" Polly sighed. "I like this about you. Now get back to cooking." After dinner, Polly was about to sneak upstairs to play games when Erik grabbed her wrist. She took 2 steps back, and landed right in his lap. He didn't even look at her, just wrapped his arms around her waist and resumed eating. Polly finally realized something was off. "What's wrong, baby? Who upset you?" "You did." "Me." Polly blinked. He turned to look at her. "I'm still thinking about what happened the night before last." Polly instantly froze. That night, just after she fell asleep, Erik had woken her up. One glance told her he had lost his memory again, so she quickly covered his mouth and whispered, "We've been married for years. You're mine, I'm yours. Our relationship is solid, no third parties. You cook, do laundry, clean. I don't have to do anything, no one has wronged me. And right now," she glanced at her phone, "it's 3 a.m. The only thing you need to do is sleep. We'll talk in the morning, got it?" This script was her go-to whenever he lost his memory. Sure enough, he had slowly released her and let her go back to sleep. When he was amnesiac, Erik was way easier to fool. All Polly had to do was hug and kiss him a bit, and he'd calm down. But once his memory returned, he was no longer so easily tricked. What made Erik terrifying was that he'd sometimes pretend to have amnesia just to test her. And by the time Polly realized it, he'd already been in full-blown madness for a while. That's why Polly always suspected his line, "I remembered everything yesterday," was a bluff. But she had no proof. The night before last, while amnesiac, Erik had dug out a pair of silver handcuffs and tossed them in front of her. "So you just let him do whatever he wants, huh? You're okay with anything he says?" Polly. She wasn't sure if she should tell him. Those cuffs were actually his. Erik never refused her requests. Whatever she wanted, he agreed to. He'd let her cuff his hands behind his back. Once cuffed, the look in his eyes grew sharper than usual. And with his arms restrained, only his waist and abs could move, letting Polly clearly see the tension and flexing of his obliques. While she was still hesitating, Erik had already constructed a tragic post-to-marriage story in his head. She had no choice but to grab his wrist, pin it behind his back, and click, snap on the cuffs. "Now do you understand what they're for?" Erik stared at her and said, "No." His voice was calm, but his gaze lingered on her lips. Openly, hungrily, obscenely. Polly suspected he was seducing her, so she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. When overly agitated, Erik would lose his memory, and when overly excited, he'd regain it. By the time Polly realized he remembered everything, it was too late. It was a disaster of epic proportions. Erik had somehow broken free of the cuffs, tossed them aside, then flipped her onto the bed and loomed over her, voice cold and sharp. "What exactly were you two doing?" "Polly." There was no explaining this one, but she had to admit, it was kind of thrilling. Maybe they really were made for each other. He loved being jealous, and she loved watching him be jealous. At that thought, Polly chuckled and pinched his cheek. "All right, tell me, how do you want me to make it up to you?" Erik paused mid-bite, then said, "You're too indulgent with me." Polly laughed. "And that's a bad thing?" "Don't you realize," he said, "maybe my memory hasn't healed because you spoil me too much?" Polly froze. "What do you mean?" Erik didn't reply. He pulled her into his arms, buried his head in her neck, and took a deep breath. Because every time the other him appeared, he could feel it. He could stop it, but he didn't. The reason was simple. He wanted to hear Polly say, again and again, that she loved him, that she chose him. She spoiled him. Whenever he craved love, she gave it freely. That feeling addicted him. So even though he could stop the other him from appearing, he didn't. Polly never withheld love from him, but his greed only grew. He wanted to devour her entirely, her gaze, her breath, her warmth. Just then, Polly called his name. "Erik?" He nuzzled her neck and whispered, "If I never recover, will you still love me?" "You talk like you're actually normal when you do remember." Polly said, "Of course I'll love you. I'll love you no matter what." And that, without a doubt, was the reason his amnesia persisted. Like someone with Munchausen syndrome, who fakes illness for sympathy, he lost his memory just to win more love. Maybe someday, the memory loss would heal on its own. But until then, Polly would continue to spoil him endlessly, until every inch of that greedy emptiness inside him was completely filled. Lately, Polly had become obsessed with online co-op horror games, often teaming up with a female gamer named Blackheart. Blackheart wasn't particularly brave, but she was sharp and quick-thinking, able to solve puzzles in minutes. Their teamwork was seamless. Blackheart handled the riddles while Polly distracted the monsters. In just one afternoon, They climbed into the top 3 of the leaderboard. Many spectators suspected some cheat was playing horror games, but upon seeing Polly's ID, their doubts vanished. After all, she was once caught eating dinner while playing Resident Evil 7. The game wasn't so much scary as it was revolting. The most infamous scene? The protagonist sitting down to dinner with his in-laws, except the table was filled not with food but grotesque rotting organs. Under dim lights, flies buzzed through the air, and slippery intestines lay bloated and ready to burst. Most players couldn't even look at the screen. But Polly? She calmly finished her meal, and even called her husband in to refill her bowl. Her husband was something else too. Seeing his wife using a horror game as a dinner show, he didn't even flinch. Instead, he covered the webcam with one hand and kissed her. At the time, new viewers in the live stream thought it was some publicity stunt, until they realized Polly hadn't even activated tipping or monetization. In short, after playing dozens of games together, Polly and Blackheart discovered they had nearly identical interests, and quickly added each other as friends. They chatted from morning till night. They even teamed up for a co-op game of It Takes Two. Knowing how possessive Polly's husband was, Blackheart asked, "Is your husband okay with me playing this with you?" Polly, "He's fine. He doesn't know how to use a computer." Blackheart, "It wasn't that Erik couldn't use a computer. He just caused inexplicable malfunctions anytime he got near electronics. He could text and call on a phone. Even video calls were possible, as long as they didn't last longer than a minute. Otherwise, the screen would flicker and glitch like something out of a horror movie." Since Erik didn't understand smartphones, he assumed Polly was gaming all day whenever she had her phone out, and didn't pay it much attention, until one day he heard her say, "See you tomorrow," to her phone, and finally realized something was off. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and casually asked, "Who are you seeing tomorrow?" "A friend," Polly replied. "Come with me. I'm not sure how safe the place is. Safer if you come along." Not only was she going to meet an online friend, she wanted him to act as her bodyguard. Erik paused. "Where?" "A nearby town. Her car broke down there. I checked. It's only a few dozen kilometers away. Figured it'd be a good chance to meet." "What kind of person? Driving that far just to meet someone?" "A female friend," Polly grinned. "What are you thinking?" Erik replied calmly, "You think I don't get jealous just because it's a woman?" Polly, "Wow, at least you're self-aware." In the end, the very jealous Erik drove her to the small town to meet her internet friend. Thankfully, his weird magnetic field didn't mess with the car's onboard computer. Otherwise, she would have been the one stuck driving for hours. To avoid scaring Blackheart, Polly picked out a soft, harmless outfit for Erik. A light gray coat, black turtleneck, something cozy and casual. She even bought him a pair of rimless glasses to soften the sharpness of his features. Erik noticed her rummaging through nearly the entire wardrobe and suddenly asked, "You're dressing me up just to make a good impression on your friend. Aren't you worried I'll get jealous because of it?" Polly, "What? Do you want me to leave you in the car and shove your head down the moment she walks over?" Erik said nothing. The meetup went smoothly. Blackheart turned out to be a striking biracial woman with chocolate-toned skin and bright clear eyes. She wore a pale lavender hoodie and carried herself with confidence. When she saw Polly and Erik, she only looked surprised for a second before smiling. "So this is the real Clement." Clement was Polly's in-game name. Polly shook her hand and introduced herself by her real name. Blackheart smiled again. "So you're Polly? No wonder your username is Clement. I'm Jane." Jane then turned to Erik. He didn't speak, just nodded slightly. Polly sighed. "Don't mind him. He's an introvert. Gets shy around new people." "Ah yes, MBTI labels to the rescue. Once you slap on an E-type or I-type label, even the strangest behavior becomes reasonable." As expected, Jane immediately accepted Erik's weird personality and nodded understandingly. Offline, the two women hit it off even better than online. Erik, hands in his pockets, followed behind them like a tall, silent bodyguard. At first, Jane tried to include him in the conversation, but after a few failed attempts, she gave up and focused on chatting with Polly. Because of Polly's username, Polly Clement, Jane assumed she was a history buff and launched into a deep discussion about 19th century history. Thankfully, Polly had actually lived in the 19th century, so she knew the customs well enough to hold her own. Otherwise, she would have been at a loss. After a while, Polly seized a chance to change the subject. "This town's pretty remote. Round-trip car repair is 200 kilometers. What made you come all the way out here?" Jane smiled. I love traveling. Jane was warm and talkative, but didn't seem eager to go into detail on that topic, so Polly tactfully shifted the conversation. After grabbing dinner at a nearby Chinese restaurant, it was already dusk. Polly walked Jane back to her motel. The area wasn't exactly safe. They ran into several shady drifters along the way. Fortunately, none dared approach, likely deterred by Erik's presence. Polly worried Jane might have trouble after they left, so she offered, "Want to come back with us? Our town's pretty safe and not far. Once your car's fixed, we'll bring you back." "Thank you, really," Jane smiled. "But I'll be fine. If I had the guts to travel alone and meet a stranger in a town like this, I've probably thought things through. Honestly, the first 10 minutes I saw your husband, my hand never left my holster." Polly blinked. "Wait, you brought a gun?" "Jane, your husband definitely noticed." Erik glanced at Jane and confirmed with a silent nod. Jane admired Polly's sense of security. Only someone who wasn't afraid of being shot could completely ignore a weapon on another person. Still, admiration aside, she was proud of her ability to travel solo. "It was great meeting you." Jane smiled as they said goodbye. "I hope we see each other again." "Polly, definitely." Not long after leaving the motel, Polly was already chatting with Jane again on her phone. As Erik started the car, he said calmly, "Her name's not really Jane." Polly paused. "What?" "Her name on her driver's license wasn't Jane." "Why are you snooping on people's licenses?" Erik shot her a cold glance. Okay, Polly conceded. "She's a young woman traveling alone. It's totally normal to use a fake name when meeting someone from the internet. Don't overthink it." Erik didn't actually care whether her name was real. He was just hypersensitive about anything related to Polly. When Jane had mentioned Polly Clement, there had been a distinct familiarity and admiration in her voice, one that made Erik scrutinize her more carefully. It was as if her affection for Polly Clement wasn't because she admired the historical figure, but because they shared common traits. Over the years, Polly had become too comfortable. Her peaceful life had dulled her instincts, and she didn't question anything Jane said. Erik was different. He viewed everyone, not just others, but even himself, with the cold, skeptical gaze of a cynic. His intuition told him that Jane had likely also lived in the 19th century. Perhaps she was the same Jane that Diana once spoke of. But he didn't tell Polly this. First, because speculation would only worry her. Second, because their bond was clearly too close enough to stir his jealousy. If Jane ever mysteriously disappeared and returned to the 19th century, that would be the time to tell Polly his theory. A neighbor was heading out for a trip and asked them to look after their cat. It was a plump, long-haired orange tabby named Cheese. It had a round little head and flopped over to show its belly at the sight of any human, except Erik. Whenever it saw Erik, it arched its back and puffed up like a porcupine. Erik's attitude toward it? Indifference. Polly adored Cheese. Even though it was only staying temporarily, she treated it like her own. Bought a ton of scratching posts, refreshed its water and food daily, and took it for walks. Yes, this was a cat that required walking. Originally, Polly had planned to walk Erik and Cheese at the same time. But no matter how many cans of food Erik fed it, Cheese still shrieked like it was being murdered whenever he approached. Left with no choice, Polly had to leave Erik at home and walk the cat alone. But the weather wasn't cooperative. Halfway through the walk, it started pouring. Polly and Cheese returned soaked to the bone, dripping wet as they scrambled back inside. Cheese was surprisingly cooperative with baths. While Polly washed herself, she also bathed the cat, then towel dried it and popped it into the dryer provided by the neighbors. With Cheese's thick, dense fur, a full dry took over an hour. Polly saw the cat licking itself contentedly inside and figured it was fine. So she went upstairs to play games. A few minutes later, a loud yowl echoed from downstairs. Polly rushed out of the study and found Erik standing in front of the dryer, staring down at Cheese. At first, the cat had hissed and fluffed up like a giant orange puffball. But when it realized Erik couldn't open the locked dryer, it calmed down and resumed grooming. Erik watched in silence until Cheese's fur was completely dry, then turned and left. Maybe he did like the cat after all. Since taking on the responsibility, Polly had read a lot of cat care tips online. She learned the key to bonding with a cat was playing with it, so she ordered a pile of toys with express shipping. When the package arrived, Cheese seemed to know it was for him, rubbing eagerly against the box. But when Erik approached, Cheese instantly twisted and darted away like a ninja. Polly handed Erik a wand toy. "Try playing with him. Erik took the wand, stuck one hand in his pocket, and lazily wiggled it. Cheese didn't even glance at him. Polly, you think that's how you play with a cat? Erik paused. Then, how do I do it? You have to mimic prey. Flick it like it's trying to escape. Let him catch it sometimes, but not too quickly. Erik muttered, Is this a cat or an emperor? Polly, don't ask questions. If you don't want to play, give it back. Erik handed it over. Polly used what she'd learned online and soon had Cheese's tail held high. Within 10 minutes, the cat was panting and exhausted. After the game, Polly and the cat went upstairs to rest, leaving Erik alone with the toy. By evening, Polly finished her game and came out of the study, only to find Erik crouched on the floor, playing with Cheese. He was a master of rope work. That little wand toy in his hands moved like it had a mind of its own. Cheese would crouch in full hunting pose for over a minute. Polly usually gave up by then, unsure whether to continue or stop. But Erik's patience was terrifying. He remained motionless until the exact second Cheese let its guard down, then lashed the toy with surgical precision. Cheese had never seen this level of play. His already fluffy tail exploded in excitement, quivering at the base. If Polly's playstyle was owner and pet, then Erik's was more like predator versus predator. Within minutes, Cheese's primal instincts were fully activated. He clamped down on the toy, whiskers flaring, teeth bared, clearly demanding Erik release it. Erik let go with a soft chuckle. Cheese bolted out of sight with the toy. Just when Polly thought the game was over, Cheese reappeared, still holding the wand, and dropped it at Erik's feet with a soft plop. Then it bumped its head against his leg affectionately. Erik looked down. You want to play more? Cheese narrowed his eyes and purred, brushing his tail against Erik's pant leg. All right then. Erik bent down and picked up the toy again. Polly felt a warm flutter in her chest. She walked over and hugged Erik from behind as he played. After getting bored of the snowy mountain town, Polly resumed her travels. They explored bustling cities, standing atop skyscrapers to admire glittering skylines, and also visited chaotic backwater towns, sleeping in RVs and waking to gunshots and shouting. Polly realized she might never have actually loved traveling. What she loved was the sense of safety that came from being with Erik. Wherever she was, he was always watching her, ensuring her safety. Because his gaze never left her, no matter how remote or dangerous the destination, she still wanted to go. With that thought, Polly suddenly sat up, resting her chin on her hand as she looked at Erik beside her. Feeling her stare, he opened his eyes, slightly drowsy, and met her gaze. Outside the RV, gunfire continued, likely from some local gang conflict. But thanks to Erik's earlier talk, the chaos never reached their RV. The space was small and closed in. Even though the bed was the biggest available for an RV, it still felt cramped. But Polly loved the atmosphere. It felt like hiding in a cave during a storm. No matter how loud the world outside, inside was always calm, safe, and unshakable. She loved it. Polly reached out, cupped Erik's chin, and kissed him. I love you, she whispered. He always thought she had saved his life. But really, no one has the power to save someone else. It wasn't salvation. It was mutual support, climbing out of darkness together. When she first felt pity for him, it wasn't really for him, but for herself. They were both people who wore masks, who never quite fit into the world. But thankfully, they both took those masks off and built the life they'd always dreamed of. Erik's breath hitched. He was about to respond, I love you too, when Polly suddenly tugged his hair. He instantly snapped awake. Polly tilted her head with a sly grin, then straddled him. Erik closed his eyes, swallowed hard, and grabbed her wrist, pulling her forward into a kiss. Outside, the gunfire grew louder, like a thunderstorm in the dark. People fought, bled, and died. But in that darkness, they made love, entwined, sharing warmth and breath. Polly was never one for rituals. She rarely remembered anniversaries, like how many days they'd been together, or how long they'd been married. She didn't make a point of keeping gifts either. Erik, on the other hand, was far more sentimental. Holiday or not, he always brought her flowers. Every time they traveled somewhere or experienced something meaningful, he would compose a song just for her. Sometimes he carved wooden dolls or made little felt animals and gave them to her. For example, after their neighbor returned and took Cheese the cat back, Polly seemed visibly down. She'd drag herself over to the neighbor's house every couple of days just to play with the cat. So Erik made her a whole collection of mini cheese figurines. Of course, if Polly had simply asked, Erik would have agreed to keep a cat without hesitation. He had no issue with adding a small animal to the household. But after a long consideration, Polly decided against it. She and Erik weren't suited for raising kids, or even pets. Even now, Erik still carried traces of his cold, beast-like instincts. The reason he won over Cheese wasn't because he was a good pet owner. It was because he knew how to deal with wild animals. Keeping a pet wasn't just a fleeting novelty. It was a commitment of 10 to 20 years. Polly felt their life was good as it was. She didn't want to gamble a pet's lifespan on whether Erik could coexist peacefully with it. The same went for having children. That's why Polly had never once considered getting pregnant. And Erik never brought up the subject of kids either. Polly even suspected the thought had never occurred to him, that there could ever be room for another life between them. He got jealous just from her scrolling past a shirtless fitness influencer, after all. One day, Polly happened to scroll past a male content creator. White dress shirt, leather arm garters, bulging muscles with veins running thick across his arms. Polly had long been desensitized to Erik's muscles, so this kind of video didn't faze her at all. She was just about to swipe away when the bedroom door opened. She jumped in surprise. At the same time, the guy in the video suddenly ripped off his shirt, exposing a well-built, sweaty chest. Polly. The air seemed to freeze. Strangely, Erik didn't say a word. His expression stayed calm. He glanced at her phone, then looked away and headed to the shower. Polly wasn't sure if he was truly calm, or pretending. Maybe the only upside of being an old married couple was that his emotional state had stabilized. He no longer went off the rails over every little thing. Come to think of it, ever since their modern life had settled down, that other Erik had rarely surfaced. Maybe he really didn't care anymore. Polly didn't dwell on it. She kept scrolling through videos. But something was clearly off with the algorithm that day. It kept feeding her borderline content. One moment it was a CEO with throat cancer, the next it was a sweaty college guy flexing after a workout. She ended up watching so many half-naked men that her eyes started to hurt. She felt a bit nauseated. Just as she was about to close the app, Erik emerged from the bathroom, wearing a robe and towel drying his hair. He glanced at her screen. Still no change in expression. The calmer he acted, the weirder it felt. Polly thought about it and decided to explain. This isn't my algorithm, I swear. Erik understood what she meant by algorithm, but didn't respond directly. You like this kind of thing? Polly looked down and realized her screen was now showing a man tied up. Would you believe me if I said I didn't? His tone was neutral. I believe you. Why wouldn't I? But Polly could still detect a hint of jealousy in his voice. She laughed and walked over to wrap her arms around his neck, looking him in the eye. I really don't like those videos. It's hard to explain. Erik had never asked, and Polly had never volunteered, but she'd dated twice before. Both guys were decent, otherwise she wouldn't have been interested to begin with. But once they got close, things changed. They'd mock her interests, quiz her out of the blue, and even threw her a surprise birthday party without asking, forcing her to be the center of attention among a bunch of strangers. Polly hated noise. She hated socializing. That party became a traumatic memory. After much reflection, Polly realized it wasn't the good intentions she hated. It was the smug, paternalistic arrogance behind them. That attitude was a deep-rooted flaw in many men. But Erik didn't have that. Of course, he wasn't perfect. He had flaws. But his flaws were the opposite of those most men carried. How could she look at anyone else when she had him? Polly smiled and leaned in to kiss him, but Erik suddenly grabbed the back of her head and pulled her slightly away. He looked at her, thumb gently brushing the corner of her eye. You told me once. Pupil dilation is a sign of arousal. Yours just dilated. Polly, I'm not blind. If my pupils don't dilate, that'd be weirder. His expression remained calm, but one eyebrow quirked slightly. Is that so? Then let me check. Polly's breath caught in her throat. Crap. If he hadn't already figured it out before, he definitely had now. He knew her exact turn-ons. He dropped the towel from his hair and picked up a tie draped over the chair. Polly blinked. Erik looked down at her and said, Hands? She held them out. Unlike rope, the tie was smooth and soft. But halfway through tying, Erik suddenly let go of her wrists. Polly frowned. What's wrong? He stared into her eyes, leaned close to her ear, and murmured, You'd rather use it on me, wouldn't you? The answer was obvious. Erik had once taught Polly the Punjab lasso. She couldn't decapitate a man with it like he could, but she knew the basics of restraint. She had always thought this wasn't her thing, but turns out she just hadn't tried it with the right person. Erik even changed into a crisp white dress shirt, buttoned all the way to the top. His arms were bound behind his back, muscles taut beneath a crisscross of rope. It was a traditional prisoner's bind. Every breath and movement made the rope dig deeper into his skin. Polly could already imagine the vivid red marks that would be left behind once the ropes were undone. But it wasn't the visual impact that thrilled her. What really made her scalp tingle was the cold, aggressive look in Erik's eyes. Even bound and motionless, the fiery jealousy burning behind his gaze made her hair stand on end. As a master of restraint, Erik couldn't truly be tied down. So if she wanted to stay on top, she had to take control, had to fight for it. But in the end, she still lost. At some point, he'd slipped the restraints, one arm now propped beside her head. The lighting was dim and yellow. His golden eyes were bloodshot, almost unnervingly intense. Veins bulged along his arms, red marks like fresh bruises etched into his skin. The marks stretched up his neck, across his chest, and down his sides. Every breath made them swell like coiled serpents under his skin. And worst of all, even at this moment, he was still thinking about that damn video, whispering into her ear like a madman, "This is what you call not interested? Polly, say one more word, and I swear I'll smack you." He shut up and kissed her hard, devouring her mouth with wet, aggressive hunger. When their lips were swollen and numb, he finally moved lower. Neither of them slept that night. Years later, after Polly had her fill of leisure, she decided to return to acting. Thanks to her steady online fame, she quickly landed several auditions for horror films. Casting is a two-way street. While directors evaluate actors, actors also choose their directors. This time, Polly wasn't interested in playing the victim again. She wanted to be the psychotic killer. The film was an American-style slasher filled with blood, gore, and stomach-turning visuals. Polly played the role of a sheltered heiress, raised in a sprawling mansion by a father who was fanatically obsessed with turning her into a perfect, docile wife, someone who could marry rich and save the crumbling family legacy. Being a horror film, the plot was filled with disturbing and grotesque scenes. For instance, to improve her sewing skills, the father killed her pet rabbit and forced her to practice stitching on its freshly skinned, slippery body cavity. Or another time, when she forgot the correct order of dining etiquette, her father murdered her etiquette teacher in front of her. Blood splattered all over the silver cutlery. Her father remained eerily calm. "Dinner is served." The daughter reached for the bell to call the servants for new utensils, but her father stopped her. "Eat." As is, in short, the daughter's coldness and twisted nature were entirely molded by her father. Halfway through the film, the father still found her sewing skills lacking. Just as he was about to criticize her again, she suddenly grabbed his hand, pinned it to the table, and drove a pair of scissors through it. Then, smiling sweetly, she began stitching his 5 fingers together. "Daddy, did I do it right this time?" This scene became the film's breakout moment. Polly's naturally sweet and delicate appearance made her deceptively angelic, and with her curled hair, she looked like a porcelain doll. When she tilted her head, smiled, and pulled the bloody scissors out, gathering her thick curls with her bloodied hand, she was irresistible. The film exploded in popularity right after its release. The more oppressed the protagonist was early on, the more terrifying her transformation later. Especially that scene where she wore a white lace gown and chased her father down with scissors in hand. Her cold, emotionless eyes and chilling presence were enough to make people forget it was just acting. Polly never expected the film to become such a hit. To get the project off the ground, she even invested her own money and dragged Erik in to compose the soundtrack. She thought it would be a loss. Instead, they made a killing. No wonder people say, once you reach a certain level of wealth, money makes more money. 2 weeks after the premiere, once the hype started to cool down, Polly finally dared to take Erik to a theater to watch the final cut. Before leaving, she dressed herself in full disguise. Hat, sunglasses, mask, the works. Yet, the moment she stepped into the theater, a girl recognized her. The girl excitedly called her name, rummaged through her bag, and finally pulled out a marker, asking Polly to sign her purse. Polly asked several times, "This kind of ink is permanent, you sure?" The girl beamed. "I'm sure. That's the whole point." Polly had no choice but to sign her stage name. Foreigners loved joining in on the excitement too. Once she signed one autograph, others swarmed over, whether they knew her or not. After signing over 10, Polly was overwhelmed. She tugged on Erik's coat for help. He had been standing aside silently for reasons unknown. But when he met her pleading eyes, he finally stepped forward and said flatly, "That's all for today. My wife and I have other plans." Everyone had already noticed Erik. His towering height made him stand out like a bodyguard. But no one had realized he was Polly's husband. He wore a slate gray coat and a wide-brimmed black hat, his face obscured in shadow, like a gentleman from another era. Their height difference was astonishing. With Polly next to him, she looked like a child being abducted. The crowd immediately quieted. Polly seized the moment to pull Erik away. Just as they slipped past the crowd, someone called out, "Wait, are you really married?" Polly had heard this question since the 19th century, and all the way into the 21st. But every time she would smile radiantly and reply with ease, "Of course." Inside the theater, Polly finally breathed a sigh of relief. "I've been an actress for years, but this is the first time I've been mobbed for autographs." Erik sat down, took a sip of her milk tea, and said nothing. He had been silent ever since she was surrounded by fans, eerily so. Was he jealous again? Polly almost laughed. The movie would be in theaters for weeks, plenty of time for him to stew. The lights dimmed. The film opened with the heroine having dinner with her fiancé. Lavish restaurant, soft music, candlelight glow. She sat across from him like a fragile porcelain doll, vacant-eyed, letting him admire her as he pleased. The young female director cleverly used the male gaze by shooting from a low upward angle, starting the scene with the heroine's delicate silk-clad feet. Early on, the heroine, still under her father's control, maintained perfect posture, legs primly closed, movements dainty. But as the plot progressed, her legs began to twitch. Her body grew tense. She seemed almost neurotic. 60 minutes in, the camera shifted away from her, to the father instead. From a narrative standpoint, the power dynamic flip was compelling. But Erik remained stone-faced, visibly agitated. Over the years, they'd watched hundreds of films together. Never had one made him feel so unsettled. He wasn't some art snob. He could appreciate cinema. He even composed the score for this one. But anything involving Polly, he just couldn't be objective. He couldn't even judge her singing voice rationally. How could he possibly appreciate her acting? Polly noticed his discomfort. To depict the protagonist's mental unraveling under paternal and societal pressure, the film featured many psychologically brutal scenes. But this was still progress. Older films often blamed female rage on a cheating husband or dead child. Rarely did a woman pick up the knife for herself. Polly whispered, "It's the whole crush first, rise later structure. A standard dramatic arc." "I know," Erik replied. Of course he knew. It was fiction, none of it real. And yet, the discomfort wouldn't go away. When the father screamed abuse at the heroine, Erik even felt the urge to kill. Polly only realized how upset he was when she saw the bite mark he left on her straw. She burst out laughing. He used to express emotion with knives. Now, he bit straws. How adorable. Unable to resist, she tugged on his collar and kissed his cheek. "Dummy." Erik looked at her, said nothing, but the dark urge in his heart vanished instantly. After the movie, Polly and Erik slipped out through the back. Just as they got into the car, she noticed a paparazzi snapping photos. She didn't care. As long as Erik was nearby, any photo of him would always be blurry, unfocused, or shrouded in shadow. Only cameras made around the year 1900 could capture his face clearly. That's why all their vacation photos were grainy black and white snapshots. At home, Erik had even built a darkroom to develop their prints. But the paparazzi were just the beginning. Back at the villa, Polly found their mailbox stuffed with love letters. She'd never thought of herself as famous, and didn't realize fans of her horror film had become this obsessed. Still, what worried her more than the fans was Erik's mental state. Standing at the mailbox, he picked up one letter with 2 fingers. It burst into flames without warning. Expression blank, Erik tossed it back in. Within seconds, the fire spread, turning every love letter into ash. "Let's go inside," he said coldly. Aside from the time he lost his memory, Erik hadn't been this jealous in years. Polly couldn't help but wonder, what was he going to do? Unexpectedly, he did nothing. Just like always, he cooked, washed dishes, watched TV with her. Not until bedtime did he suddenly sweep her into his arms, toss her onto the bed, and pin her down with one arm beside her head. Expression unchanged, he pushed her knees apart with his own. Then a rough, passionate kiss crashed down on her. Their kisses had never been passive. Erik grabbed her chin, sucking her tongue so fiercely it ached, but she fought back just as hard, tangling with him, refusing to yield. He never stood a chance. Even after all these years, his resistance was paper thin. The moment she returned his kiss the way he liked, he trembled, goosebumps rising across his skin. Polly laughed. "You're too cute." The cute Erik didn't respond. He just kissed her deeper, so hard it almost hurt. That slight tingling pain spread down from her jaw and bloomed across her chest. It felt like the still, humid heat before a summer storm. His breath clung to her collarbone, hot and sticky, like it was extracting something from inside her. Time passed. The air grew thick. Then the storm finally broke. Erik raised his face, sharp jawline slick with saliva. His damaged cheek, gleaming golden eyes, and that faint trace of moisture. It was almost too much. It made her heart skip a beat, like he had her kink nailed down perfectly. Erik rarely spoke during moments like this, unless his jealousy hit a peak. But Polly always tried to make him talk. "You're in a bad mood today, huh?" No reply. "So many people like me. Doesn't that bother you?" "Happy for you," he said at last. His voice was calm, but the veins popping on his arms and sides said otherwise. Hours passed before Erik calmed down. He carried her to the bath, dressed her in clean pajamas, and sat her on his lap to dry her hair. Polly clung to his neck, half asleep. Online, the movie's popularity only kept growing. Polly's fan base exploded. Not only did the director ask her to shoot a sequel, but several big-name directors reached out too. She turned them all down. She was already financially free. She only needed to act in the things she liked. No need to play the game for others' approval. And it wasn't just her who got famous. Erik's haunting score also drew huge acclaim. There hadn't been a horror soundtrack this memorable since Jaws, whose iconic two-note theme perfectly conveyed lurking danger. Most respected composers preferred prestige films, scoring maybe one film a year. Horror usually wasn't their first choice. So it had been a long time since a horror movie produced such a famous theme. Erik changed that. With just two notes, he created an oppressive, chilling atmosphere. His music played a major role in the film's success. Invitations poured in for Erik to compose again, Polly told him, and he nodded without much expression. Polly smiled. Still jealous over the movie? Erik glanced at her and said nothing. At first, yes, he was jealous. Seeing Polly's face blown up across a 500-square-foot screen, every detail crystal clear, even the tiny mole on her earlobe, how could he not be? Especially those early scenes, where she was constantly berated. He had to force himself to breathe to suppress the urge to kill. But even so, a strange pleasure had crept in. Polly was his wife. Others could admire her from afar, but only he could kiss her, touch her, earn her affection. So yes, he was jealous, but also proud beyond words. Still, such thoughts felt too shameful, too absurd for a man who had been married for over a decade. So he kept them to himself. No matter how Polly asked, he would never tell her what he really thought. For Christmas, Polly bought Erik a custom-made coat. Peak lapel, knee-length, black leather polished to a soft shine. Once he put it on, he looked more like a serial killer than ever. Now she finally understood why Erik had once been so obsessed with making her clothes. Just seeing him in that coat awakened something inside her. She admired him for a while, then decided to unwrap her real gift later that night. His present to her? A new song. He'd play it for her at midnight. Christmas, after all, is the perfect time to watch horror movies. Every year brought new Christmas-themed slashers. That night, they watched one about a Santa Claus serial killer. Halfway through, the power went out. The projection vanished. Only the tree shadows swayed beyond the glass doors. Erik placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll go check." He always did. But this time, midnight came, and he hadn't returned. Polly frowned and rose to fetch the hunting rifle from the fireplace. Just then, bang, bang, something slammed against the glass. She spun around, only to see a bloody figure outside the window. A towering Santa Claus wielding a chainsaw stared at her through the glass. In his hand, a severed, dripping head. Erik's head. Her heart stopped. Seconds ticked by. Finally, she could breathe again. Behind her, eerie piano music began to play. The fear had numbed her limbs. She'd seen countless horror films, played every famous haunted house. After time travel, nothing had truly scared her again. Desensitization is real. She had accepted that fact. But tonight, Erik's Christmas gift had brought the fear back. She followed the music. Of course, the Santa and severed head were all props he had made, just like the ones he used to craft for her in the 19th century. And there he was, seated at the piano, watching her intently, playing her gift, wearing that black coat, a white mask, and eyes gleaming with excitement. He looked terrifying. Without hesitation, Polly grabbed his collar, bent down, and kissed him. Her nerves were still screaming. The fear had turned to desire, swelling, boiling over. She felt alive again, vivid, electric. This was the best Christmas gift she had ever received. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nuevi Story. Thanks for listening.